And it is 7:03 on February 7th, 2023. We'll call to order this regular meeting of the Reading Board of Education. All members are present in person, and we are live streaming to YouTube. The first order of business is the consent agenda, which is the approval of minutes of January 12th, our special meeting January 19th, and our regular meeting January 19th. Are there any questions or comments on any sets of minutes?
Oh, I noticed one small thing on, let's see. January 19th minutes.
Which one?
No, oh, you know what? Never mind. I was looking at the wrong one.
So you're all set?
Yeah.
If there are no questions or comments, we'll deem all three sets approved by unanimous consent and move on to item 3 on the agenda, public comments. Any members of the public wishing to? Seeing none, we'll move on to board member comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to administrative reports. Dr. McDaniel.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We have a few administrative reports, and I thought that I would kick off with a few noteworthy news items before handing over to some of our administrators. First of all, we sent out a survey today to our 8th grade families, and we're looking to get some information on the 8th grade transition to Joel Barlow High School next year. So far, we've received 43 responses from the 8th grade families that we sent out a survey to. Let me clarify, to John Reed Middle School and to Helen Keller Middle School. The survey is focused on written communication regarding the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. Families had an opportunity to meet with counselors from Joel Barlow High School, that there's written communication about how those meetings went. The purpose of meeting with counselors is to help individual students and families plan course selection for next year. There was a program of studies evening at Joel Barlow High School in January, and there's a question about the program of study, the presentation that evening. And we're looking at kind of the process and the transition in general from 8th grade to 9th grade. And we're giving our families an opportunity to provide some feedback. And if they feel like there's another area they would like to make a comment on, they can. And if they need additional help or questions, they can leave their name and contact information, and we can follow up with them individually as well. So we're hoping to get increased survey participants. This is what the survey looks like. We'll be sending additional reminders, because we really do feel like this is an important data point, so that we can provide this information to our administration at the 2 middle schools and our counselors. And it's also important to coordinate with the high school as well. It's a 3-point Likert scale, well, actually a 4-point scale. And you can see here the style of questions about the written communication, about the program of study night, whether it was very helpful, not helpful, or whether you didn't get a chance to attend. We could even analyze, what is the response rate of the program of study. There's an opportunity for longer responses. To what extent do you feel well informed about the transition? And obviously there's 2 open-ended questions as well. So looking at the 43 responses so far, we're getting some positive feedback, and we're also getting some ideas to improve ways in which we communicate about this really important activity in moving from 8th grade to 9th grade.
Is there thought about doing a survey on the other side of the horizon too, with current 9th graders, about how their expectations have met reality?
Well, there's a survey that's in development about 9th, 10th, and 11th grade students and the program of study and evening itself from those families' perspectives, and how they're doing for course selection. And I could add that question somewhere.
Because I'm curious, when you have 8th graders who go to that program of study, they hear a picture of what Barlow looks like, and then they live it the next year. And I'm curious how much alignment there is between what their expectations is and what reality ends up being, and how that influences what we do here to prepare them for that experience.
So probably in the year before COVID, we did a learning walk that included sit-down sessions with 9th graders, where we asked them to tell us more about their transition from 8th grade to 9th grade and expectations at the middle school level versus at the high school level, and what they wanted us to know so that we could improve upon the experience. So that was interesting, and we had planned to follow it up again. Well, obviously it took me a break during the COVID years, but we're hoping to do that again this spring.
That's great, because I thought the conversation we all had at the tri board in October was valuable from the perspective of seniors who are heading off into the world from our schools versus now 9th graders who are sort of experiencing high school for the first time. What did they wish they knew when they got there, and how can that inform our practices here?
That is a really interesting one.
Right, so our take on it was more of the academic experience as opposed to the communication and course selection.
But I think that having sat through the course of study presentation in the past, it paints a certain picture of what the high school looks like. And I'm curious the extent to which students view that presentation and view reality, and where's the disconnect? Because it's selling a vision of the school that I'm not sure matches everybody's reality. And I'm curious the extent, where that's true and where it's not.
So we can look at academic and social experiences, expectations versus reality, the general transition from 8th grade to 9th grade, how's it going, and I think that's interesting. So that is something that we will remind parents about filling out, because I think that's a really important information. Also this week, and at the end of last week, I sent an email to everyone talking about a special education study. And what we're looking at doing is, and one of our strategic priorities is actually to look at special education, look at the needs of all learners in priority number 4, but in particular, look at best practices and conduct a series of focus groups for our teachers, staff, administrators, to study PPTs, to observe our various programs, including bridges and bases, also to conduct study groups and study group sessions with parents. And we will be following up with key stakeholders about next steps. We've already met with administrators to introduce someone named Andrea Einhorn, who I've worked with in the past, to come in and to look at best practices and to identify what's working well and what we can really build on in the future. So I'll be sending out more information to families in particular and to parents to invite them to attend various focus group sessions so we can have discussions about that. So the full parameters of that are still being developed, and I'll be sending more information to the board and to the families, but we have started kind of step 1, which is coming in and starting to meet with our leaders, which will then move into PPTs and the nuts and bolts of special education. The other update I have is really about the reading waiver, which is due at the end of this month. I think Dr. Pearson, you go maybe kind of have some thoughts on that. I know that she's working on that with her team, but Stephanie, would you like to just kind of have a brief update?
Right, so the reading waiver, any district that does not have an immediate plan to implement one of the approved comprehensive reading programs, products that the state has approved, must respond to the state with a waiver. And so this is the way the waiver process will look. We will respond to a series of prompts from the state about how each component of our reading curriculum is tied to the expectations related to the science of reading. So this will include the units of study through Teachers College, which we have made our own and adapted slightly, as well as Hegarty and Foundations in the early grades. Once we submit the information to the state, which will also include a lot of student data information without the students' names, but how our district plans to close the gap in terms of achievement with any students in a certain subgroup. So it could be within special education or English language learners. We will submit this packet of information to the State Department of Education, and that they will either respond with, thanks so much, you're approved, or thanks so much, here are our questions, we need you to respond to the questions, and we will do a back and forth, probably not dissimilar to the evaluation process that we went through almost a decade ago. And then at the end of the back and forth with the state, they will either deem our program components as acceptable or say, we reject your request for a waiver, and you then have a year to put a comprehensive program in place that we deem acceptable. So that's what the program will entail. It is a tremendous amount of work, and this is where you've heard Dr. McKinnon say, and I will not ask you to take out the tiny violins, but where we don't have that middle layer of curriculum coordination. So I must have our literacy specialists from Reading Elementary School and Samuel Staples in Easton participate in this process. They are the ones who are deeply acquainted with curriculum implementation in classroom, and they are the ones who are certified in this area. So that means that they will be pulled out of their roles for a number of days to work on this process with me so that we can submit the waiver. It's a tremendous amount of work. So I have been in touch with my colleagues in Durg A. All of the Durg A districts, with the exception of one, are submitting a request for a waiver. And in all of those other districts, they have large teams of people. The good thing is that we're all pretty collaborative. So people are willing to share the good work. We are all using the same resources. So it just seems like not a great use of time to say, let's everyone begin the narrative from scratch when we're all doing the same thing. So I appreciate the collaboration from the other districts, especially those with more comprehensive curriculum leadership structures. So we will be working to put that together, and I expect to submit at the end of the month.
Is there a timeline on when we can expect to hear from the state?
There's
Summer, fall, winter next year?
They have not told us what that timeline will include. I mean, I will say that, you know, I made reference to when the teacher evaluation system was put into place by legislative mandate, there was the newly formed talent office at the state that had many people staffing that office who committed hours to reading through district's evaluation plans. So at that time, Dr. Josephsberg, then superintendent, and I made 2 trips up to Hartford in person. We met with people. There was a lot of back and forth, but they had the staff to do it. The State Department of Education does not have that kind of staff any longer. So I honestly do not know how they are going to respond to the volume of waiver requests that they will absolutely receive, because different, again, and I'm sorry, I won't take too much time, different than, say, the teacher evaluation mandates. The state developed a model and said, you can accept our model and implement our model. And that was a pretty easy decision for a lot of districts, because it was a matter of saying, oh, okay, they've created the comprehensive model. There's nothing really to purchase. Of course, we would need to provide training on the seed model. We decided to go in another direction and create something that was more true to the way that we do things in Eastern Reading and Region 9. But with this reading mandate, there are hundreds and thousands of dollars that are being moved to local districts, and that we're expecting boards to approve and taxpayers to fund. So it's a very different situation.
I would say that, you know, although we're unclear about the timeline when we will hear concerning our waiver and whether it is, you know, approved or rejected, or maybe questions that come or clarifications, it's the general feeling that we'll probably be moving towards some type of research-based program from a manual program that the state suggested. And they say, let's say they suggested 5 programs. I feel that within the next 12 to 24 months, we will be using probably one of these programs. So the waiver, I believe, actually, if we're going to be ending up using one of these programs, provides districts with more time to study and to find the right program. Because if we asked our reading teachers, or if we asked our staff, or even if we asked schools and districts around us, which program are you going with? I'm not sure everyone has identified exactly the choice that they would like to go with. And it's a very big investment. Let's say it's over $100,000. We'd be having a conversation today where our budget is potentially back in the 5% range. And so and I do believe it's a matter of when, we are selecting one of these 5 programs, it's important to get this decision right, and that we have really good stakeholder engagement. People believe that that we've selected the right approach.
At this point in our review of the state approved programs, we have not found one that we think really fits all of our needs. One product was promising, but then when we gathered more information from the users, they said actually the foundational skills component is weaker, and that's the entire purpose of the science and reading legislation. So it's important that we properly vet and possibly even pilot components of programs. I was going back and forth with the sales rep saying, can we purchase everything but this component? You know, what would that look like? And they said, you really can't dismantle the program that way.
There's no opt-out, right?
There's no opt-out, so that the waiver in theory is the opt-out. It's a matter of saying, this is what we're doing and this is how it satisfies the requirement, which may or may not be acceptable. I mean, we're going to be honest, of course.
So there is an option of opting out, possibly.
But what I'm
Buying
saying is,
time, it doesn't opt out.
yes, what I'm saying is, I don't think it's really an opt-out. I really think it provides districts with time to choose one of these 5 or 6 programs, and we will likely be using one of these 5 or 6 programs in the near future.
So I mean, waiver is a misnomer. It's basically, I'm not ready. So you can put nothing on that form and submit it and have the same results if you spend hundreds of hours making the form right. Because you're gonna get a year from whatever they did not.
We could, I can say that many districts around us are submitting the waiver with the full intention to continue doing exactly what they have been doing. In part because if you look at student performance in reading, especially compared to mathematics, reading in our area is really not the area of concern. So not all districts are looking to make a change in the program.
So I think it sounds like, without belaboring the point tonight, that to Dr. McKinnon's point, if we're going to be moving this direction in the next 12 to 24 months, we should have a conversation about the whys of that versus the standing on a waiver position
Yes,
outside of a budget conversation.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more things. We've talked about the water filtration system at Reading Elementary School. And we hope to have the water filtration system installed by the end of 2022, so the calendar year. We work with a company named Water Systems and Solutions. And they're a very small crew. We've worked with this company for many years, and they're very, very good at what they do. And the reason why the delay occurred initially was because we had to move through the approval process with the state in terms of modification and design of this system. And so the goal was, again, end of December, January. We have made progress, and so you can see some photos on the board about the water filtration system, and it's being built at the moment. And unfortunately, a member of their company, who's a key member of their team, suffered an illness which delayed them a little bit, and so we're still working towards the goal. But this system really is focused on removing the high mineral content in the water RES. And I'll provide you with an update soon, and you can see that they've made progress and they're close to the finish line. And I'll provide you with more information.
And the mineral content is what caused the discoloration.
Yes, yeah, the iron and the manganese.
And then the state is involved with this process as well.
The state is involved, DPH is involved in the not just the approval of the system that we develop and water testing following the installation of the system, but they actually approve the design, almost like before you build a house, you have to get your permits in line and the design through the building department. So your designs are approved for building can start the same way that we look when we engineer a water system.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are, and we can provide an update to the public on that, but we're getting close to having the water filtration system completed. We also sent you a note. This is a little bit more difficult to see, but there was water station damage at John Reed Middle School, and essentially There's a pit that holds some infrastructure, which includes a dehumidifier, a chlorine feed pump, and a booster pump. And a sump pump, which pumped water out of that pit, failed, which allowed water to creep up inside the pit, which damaged 2 other pieces of equipment. And so we're in the process of, and we installed a new sump pump, and we have to replace the dehumidifier and the chlorine feed pump. And so there's an insurance claim that Ms. Scrofani is working on submitting. And there's some damages there that we are working on. And what we'll do is provide a memo to you, a kind of a detailed memo about where we are, what the price entails and so on.
And this didn't cause any disruption to the building and didn't bring a big risk, right?
No, it was discovered over the winter break. And it was, the sump pump was fixed immediately. And we just have to make some decisions about how we, what pieces we need to replace moving forward. So is there anything else you need to add there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We're
You expect insurance to cover full costs?
good. We do have a deductible, but it's $1,000. I do think that I'll be coming back with some recommendations for preventative measures, maybe to the at some point.
Yeah, you want company have anything?
So. Yes,
That might be one.
let's talk about that. Do a deeper. Yeah.
And finally, if you recall, we did an RFP for an architect firm to come in. We selected the winning bid. Tecton Architects were identified as the company that was going to look at the learning spaces at Renning Elementary School and John Reed Middle School. We had a meeting with the administration of each school. I believe it was last Friday. Both Melissa and Jan identified some members of their staff who could be involved in that meeting. And Tecton Architects gave a presentation in this room and provided an overview of the type of work that they do, which is basically designing educational spaces, and how they have conversations with staff about what and how their educational spaces can improve teaching and learning. So we met in this room, and primarily we talked about how can we make this space more flexible, more suited towards meetings and learning. We also met in the other in the library and had the same conversation. And then we went over to Reading Elementary School. Melissa assembled a team. Same thing as a presentation from the architects about the process and how to engage stakeholder feedback. We toured the kindergarten wing, the 1st and 2nd grade wing primarily, and we brainstormed ways in which, according to members of the team that Melissa selected, ways in which they can improve the space. And what are the major things that are on their mind? So the kindergarten, 1st grade and 2nd grade teachers talked about storage and talked about how they organize students' belongings, backpacks and jackets and so on. They also talked about the kindergarten hallway and the lack of a wall and the lack of classroom doors, the way in which the campus was designed originally when the last renovation took place, and how we can brighten up that hallway, add walls and doors, increase storage solutions. In between each kindergarten classroom, there's actually a storage room, which may have been originally designed as a small group meeting area. And so we talked about ways we can return to that concept of having our intervention specialists meet in those spaces and use storage in another creative way. And so we looked at those spaces as well. We don't have a timeline yet as to next step. I know that you mentioned there's an ARPA meeting next week. This week. It's based on the meeting that we had on Friday. The next steps would be for the architects to kind of come back with some ideas and some preliminary ideas, and then to meet with the committees again about those ideas. So we're a little bit too early in the process. For that.
Right, to provide a number, basically.
Yeah, so it's somewhere between $5 million.
That's what I'll present.
That's all I have. So we could hear from the building administration about how things are going in the schools. That would be great. Melissa, can we start with you?
Jason,
We
I
pause
think,
for a second. Is there any questions? You
Oh,
have a
yes.
lot. Do you have any questions on Jason's comments, John?
I think at one point we talked about community feedback sessions, like outside of the school admin, is that still on the table?
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do is to get some general ideas down on paper. So we can show some renderings and some drawings and kind of some solutions for those spaces, and then we can get community feedback. And I think that is still very much on our to-do list. And yes, we do intend on doing that.
We can try and set the attendance record for the public at one of these meetings.
That'll be, yeah, sure. Thanks, John.
Any other questions on anything that Judge McGinnis?
All right, I'm up.
Thanks, Melissa.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So we kicked off the month of January with a lot of fun happenings, including our January Kindness Assembly. Fourth grade student council members hosted a school-wide kindness assembly on January 27th. The whole school got involved, including our preschool students who started and kicked off the assembly with the song, "The More We Get Together." Our fourth graders ended the assembly with the song called "Kindness is Cool." In between, our student council members created 3 scenarios that replicated what kindness looks like, what it feels like to be included, what it also feels like to be excluded. And there's also a link for anyone that's interested in actually watching the video, and the whole entire assembly was included on the board report and also as part of our Rockies Weekly Roundup. Last Thursday, we had our first 4th grade and 3rd grade chorus concert and orchestra concert combined. I believe I was told it was probably our first evening concert since 2018. It was a really big turnout. We have probably the most chorus children ever that have wanted to participate. Up to 70 students are in chorus, and then we had about 25 students who have participated in orchestra. So it was a really great performance. A huge shout out to Miss Maddie Baker and also Donna Edwards for leading our children. And then earlier in the month, our 4th grade students kicked off the Battle of the Books. The Battle of the Books is a really fun reading initiative. It's something that actually I did as a 4th grade teacher, and I have been so excited to finally to bring it to one of the schools that I worked at. The 4th grade team was really receptive to the idea. So over the next couple of months, 4th grade students will have an opportunity to read up to 50 books. Along the way, there will be some mock battles. There will be some 4th grade Battle of the Book swag, t-shirts, prizes for X amount of books read. And then I believe it's April 3rd is the actual battle where classrooms will compete as teams and answer some questions from the books that they've read. And we won't know who in April will decide who the winning team is. The holder of the battle trophy until next year. So it's a really great initiative.
Quickly, I heard anecdotally that there were some concerns about space at the concert and being able to accommodate everybody that wanted to be there. Given what you're saying about a high degree of participation, is there consideration given to either running it multiple times or moving the venue or making it otherwise accessible to everybody who wants to attend?
Sure. So we've talked about the spring concert, possibly maybe changing the layout of how we do things. I will say, even though there were restrictions, every child had, we had up to 2 parents or 2 family members per child. And we also had standing room for families because we had probably over 200 adults in the gymnasium that evening. But I think overall, it wasn't a huge inconvenience for our community. I think the majority of people attended. But we have talked about in the spring, possibly doing it different, trying to do it a little differently.
Just want to make sure nobody's left out.
Yeah, of course. And we also talked about how we didn't realize the amount of children that wanted to participate in chorus. So initially, when Maddie Baker started the chorus after school club, we didn't want to turn anyone away. So that just kept growing and growing and growing too, which is 70 kids times 2 is 140 adults right there. So it was a combination of things.
Any update on kindergarten signups?
From what I've been told, it's funny, I just had a conversation with Como the other day. I don't have the exact numbers. But yes, enrollment is high, for this time of year already. I think she said we had close to 90 already, which is, much higher than what we had at last year at this time. And that doesn't include the influx that comes in over the summer as well. But yeah, we're looking at, definitely larger class sizes in kindergarten for next year for sure.
That's 90 packets returned.
I'm not sure, but Como did emphasize that it's a lot more registration than we've had in previous years, probably, post-pandemic, this time of year.
If we get a firmer
Yeah.
numbers for Thursday, that'll be helpful. If we drill in on what this all means, because
Yeah.
90 is a big number against 5 sections. But
Yeah, I think we're looking at class sizes would be around the 20 mark if projections keep coming in. For K,
Was the demand for pre-K higher this year too?
I'm not sure.
Because 90 is wildly different than this one.
That is,
I can triple check, but I know we had the conversation because we were joking that we would start to remember that there was gonna be 28 kids per class next year. So I know we said there was about 90 kids that
It could
have
be,
registered.
could be 90 outgoing packets, and I think a lot of parents get those packets and they're like, we'll wait till next year.
Right, that's the age-old question. And thank you, Mike, for asking my standard question. That's what I'm gonna
Didn't want you to forget.
do.
so this is, I actually have a slide on it, and it changes things a little bit, so we'll have to delve into that.
Yeah, you can definitely look into that. And again, I could be off the mark, but I know she was like, we have a lot of kids. We're looking at like 20 kids in a class right now.
All right, okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Jen?
Still prior to the State of the Union. So, we have lots to celebrate with John Reed. So you've heard a lot about our Cyber Patriot team, and we've put a lot of information out to the community, but we had the #1 middle school team in the state. And I just want to recognize the students and the adults who helped that team succeed. So Allie Prue is a team captain, Alex Erickson, Sarah Jones, Max Newell, Clara Smith, and Phoebe Swedrock were the team members. Our teacher was Brian Holmes. And then the mentor from the outside was Mr. Sean Maynard. And I know we've recognized them before, but they put a lot of time and work into that. And I'm very proud. The JRMS PPA hosted the reflections winners, and I'd like to recognize them as well. So we have Austin Bradford for music, and he put together a minor intervention is the title of his work. For literature, Sophia L. Baker, singing in the shower. For visual arts, Reese Frere for matter flow. And for literature, Neil Ucandela, Taken by the Sea. And I just want to recognize them. We did have a concert that was a packed house on January 26th. In addition to the choral groups, the orchestra, the jazz band, and the band playing, we had student art on display in the cafeteria. Anticipating Mr. Parkin's question, we are meeting tomorrow with the music teachers, Mr. Ebert and Mr. Duffy, to debrief. We had a large crowd, and so we need to take a look at seating and making sure that everyone who wants to get into the auditorium can't get in, or auditorium, I'm dreaming, into the gym, can get in.
We're just saying it's moving to the Barlow auditorium.
All right. We'd like to thank the Weller Foundation for $834. It was a donation to the library. It's the first time the Weller Foundation has donated to the middle school libraries, and it's specific to purchasing library books. So yes, they received a thank you note from us, but the organization is based in Newtown. They usually donate to the high school, but they kind of expanded broadened their breadth and included middle schools this year. So very appreciative on that. This 8th graders had their first dance with food and frolic. Was a great time by all. And we also have a reading challenge, the 20 book challenge. And 85 students and staff members are currently participating. Maria Frederick, our library media specialist, honored the students who have met certain goals with a breakfast last Friday. So we'd like to recognize that as well. And I think that's it for now. There's a lot, the update has a lot of things in it, so take your time, peruse, enjoy. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
I have a general question on Cyber Patriot. I understand that the program involved pulling kids from class and from WIN on a regular basis. What impact does that have on instructional time? And I understand that we're like 5 teams of kids, so how does that impact other classes when large portions of kids are pulled for long periods of time?
Our teacher is really good about communicating, so teachers plan ahead knowing who's going to be out on that particular day. And I always like that, you know, when you think back to your middle school or high school careers, what are the things that you truly remember and you learned from the most? And I would hate for an opportunity like this to be restricted in some way, when it brings so much forward for everyone. Because we pull students for music, we pull students for other events as well.
Thank you.
All right, come on.
Thanks, Jen. Okay. I know Dr. Pearson, you had a brief comment already, but I think we can move to Ms. Sarah Kafani.
I was going to report on some facilities things, but I think you heard them all. So, when we take a look at our health claims analysis, you will notice that this month was 179,057. So that is very nice. That is nice and low. So we are in a downward trend when it comes to healthcare claims. So we are in very good healthcare claim shape. To the question. It doesn't make a calculation up at the bottom that bad.
Bob calculation,
Yeah.
don't like it. It looks like a 220, you're,
Sure what it's pulling from.
it's pulling from last
Is
year.
that where it's from?
Your sales haven't been updated to the new
It's
year.
244,658.
Yeah, you're, well,
I wasn't sure if yeah, I'm assuming that means current year.
current
Yeah.
year claims
Yeah.
are running 227 a month.
227,
Right.
it's not running.
So the 281 is last year's
Is last
claims divided by
Yeah.
12, you know, the 287 is 2020 divided by 12. The average is
That's
off a little bit
yeah.
too, so, I
will
think
fix
the
those
takeaway
and
might
send
be,
you a new report.
yeah, so the takeaway might be, last year was running 281, this year is running 227. Good narrative,
Great narrative.
yeah,
Sort of restoring to the trend line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
going
Going
back
back
to
to where we.
2018.
Right, if you apply sort of 10% year-over-year projected increases going back to 2018 against headcount, you're probably right on that trend line now. If you take everything else out.
So I think that's really good news for us. Do you want me to talk about the slide from the budget, or do you want to really?
Well, just that if we're trending in that direction, if you recall, we kind of based one of our decisions in terms of Brown based on trending, and then the next 6 months would be 250,000. And so we'd have to see it probably another month to see where we're trending. But I think we're in even better shape.
As deductibles get exhausted, the numbers do go up in the back half
Right.
of the year. So.
So that is good news, and we'll not pretty much that. But that was a slide from our last presentation, if you recall. Sorry, please continue.
No. It's fine. But do you want to go through one of the slides? One, or do you want to wait?
I think we can wait on the.
Okay,
budget.
we'll wait on that, okay. So everything else is, so when you look at the rest of our budget object summary. One of the things that I've asked people to do at the schools this month, and so that will be reflected in your report next month, is to really take a look and close out whatever open POs they can for things that need to be purchased, so that we can really start to get to that bottom line to see exactly where we are in terms of our expenditures. So that when I come back next month, I'll be able to say, this is a better idea of where we're going to be projected to end. And what does that look like? So we did have some expenses that are, we had some unanticipated expenses, obviously with some of the, with, some water things and some trees that fell. So a few little things, but nothing really stands out as something that is of note. So I think we're in really healthy shape.
What conclusions can we draw from the unencumbered number at the bottom there at this time?
I'd feel much more comfortable telling you more conclusions to draw at the end of next month. One thing that happens in Reading is that we often encumber everything towards the beginning of the year. And so then we need a pause to actually see where we are, make sure we need those encumbrances, and then move forward. Like our utilities are not running. I anticipated that they might be a little bit higher, but we've had a nice warm winter. And that is a very positive, that has a positive impact on us on the bottom line. But that's one of the areas that that needed to kind of be tweaked in our budget planning, because while it rolls up for you guys to see, we were under budgeting in one area and over budgeting in the other. And so it always kind of evened itself out, but now we've made those internal corrections as well.
It's become truer and truer.
Which will become truer and truer as time goes on.
Go ahead. I was gonna ask, do you have a monthly process? Like, do you just open the budget in July and close it in June the following year, or is there an open and close it each month? Where there is an examination of open POs and, expenditures that may or may not be real.
So the budget that you're seeing, that budget book that you all see, I've taken all of the, do you want to pull it up? I can, if you go to that folder where, if you click on the 2023, 2024.
Oh, you actually want to see the encumbrances?
Yeah, so if you click on so this is, so these are all the current year expenditures. And so I upload these into, our cost centers. And then if you, for example, click on technology as an example. So if you click on technology, you actually can see what has been drawn down. So if you click on staff and student hardware as an example, on the left, you'll see what we budgeted. And then in column H, you'll see all of the cost centers and the budget units. So if you scroll over to the right a little bit, you'll see what we budgeted, what we encumbered, and then what we spent, and then who that vendor was. So that we get a really very detailed view of exactly what we spent in this particular cost center on that sheet. And then so a new process is to look at those to make sure that they're hitting where we intended. And this is also where we can see whether or not we've been reimbursed for something. So as an example, you'll see E-rate as one of those, the E-rate category to equipment and licensing. So if they don't line up across, like it's sort of, here's the budget on one side, and then column H over is the current expenditures. And so I can look and see, have we been reimbursed for E-rate money for this year? And then we can ask that question to see, well, that's one of the things that comes in that does not come in early in the year, it comes in later. So that we can kind of anticipate where that will be, and that'll hit that line. So we do that before the board meeting monthly, but that is a completely new process for us. And
Where you're doing a monthly review.
where we do the monthly review with the cost centers with the secretaries at each, with the each, at each school.
Okay.
And then also with special education as well, so that we can make sure that they're hitting where they need to hit, and then we can do some better budgeting for the future.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a rolling type budget where you start and, you're examining as you go along, but it just becomes more and more focused as we get closer to the end of the year.
As we get closer to the end of the year.
You know what the answer, the final answer is gonna be.
Yeah.
Got it.
So that's essentially the process that we have.
Okay.
That we have happening currently behind the scenes. One of the things that does not hit in this particular report that we'll work on this summer is that you'll notice that the salaries are not true in this particular report. So I can run all of the expenditures, but I'm not seeing the salaries as being encumbered. So that's something that I'd like to work on with the vendor this summer to try to make it so that this report will actually show all the salary encumbrances, because oftentimes that's where you'll see, we'll need to make the most amount of adjustments. Because instructional supplies is kind of a low percentage of our budget, but salaries are a huge one. And so that's the next sort of level of this particular exercise.
So
Is that helpful?
It is, yeah, it is, because, just comparing your process to my process at work, where we take the full year budget and then we spread it over the months. And then we open and close each month. And, the process, as you get towards the end of the month is you drill down on, to the POs and make sure you close them or get rid of them or push them into the next month so that, so that you can have an accurate close and compare year over year, that kind of thing. But if you have a budget that opens and it just rolls for the entire year, and you maybe create a PO and encumber something
For utilities,
in month one, right?
And then you keep
That thing's
drawing
gonna
down.
stay open all year long, and you're gonna receive on that all year long. It's hard to get an interim look at how we're doing, right?
we also, the way that we're funded, we only request funds from the town at certain intervals, and they have to be something that's an actual expense. So when we request funds, it's an actual, we actually have a bill that we need to pay the money for or against.
That's
So we
something
don't,
that I haven't thought about much. I've heard that many times over the years, but I keep forgetting that, you're drawing, not just like, there's your 22 million.
no, yeah, that's, yeah, so one example of where we're working very closely with the town finance is, in the case of the RES water filtration system. So although the budgets have closed for last year, you approved that out of last year's funds. I can't ask the town for those funds until the project is complete. And so it's a bit in, so the Board of Finance in Reading understands that project is not complete, but I'm counting on the funding from last year for that project.
right, that's a good example, and there's sometimes pressure from the auditor
There's
to
a
close
to
that
close.
year is, right?
Yes, and so they've put that, because that's a very particular project that has a very concrete number.
Yeah.
Then the auditor has put that in sort of as a placeholder in writing for us, so that because they've done their close, so that we can then draw against that. So that's something that we have to watch very carefully over the course of,
Makes sense.
Yeah, and this is the time of year as we're trying to hone in on the budget, that we look at this object summary and we say, oh, this is only running at 8%, this is only running at 22%. What can we learn from that as far as applying to next year's budgeting strategy?
it is going to be much more valuable for us to be able to actually see, here's the actuals, here's what we can plan for next year. here's how much money, here's how much we've spent to date. These are the things that we purchased in these cost centers. That will be a much more, it is a much, you can see, click on that little import tab right in it, please. Scroll down to the bottom. That's your planning one. Go back to our current expenditures. It has little snowflakes in front of it.
Snowflakes.
Of course, that's the news thing that we. It's February.
It is February. We change it up. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, these are these are all the expenditures that hit. And so then this maps to all the different places. So I think that I don't know of any other way to kind of, I met with the way that we receive monies from the towns. I've met with our Casco group to talk about best practices and what that looks like. And I think we're really trying to find a process that really works.
So I think part of it's deceptive. If anybody in the public looks at this object summary and they say, oh, you've got $100,000 left in this line. Well, every year that hits in April, because that's a bill for this. And there's
Yes.
so many of these little nuances that are
Yeah.
hard to pick up on.
They're hard to say, but in those cost centers, we'll be able to identify what they are, which I think is, for budgeting, we'll get sharper and sharper as we have that information collected and.
Like it's much easier on a document like this to reflect when the excess cost reimbursement kicks in than on something like this that just shows it the negative encumbrance for
Yes.
months and months.
Yep. Because I know that we're not getting it until June.
Okay.
And no transfers that require action.
Does anybody have any other questions? I think next month I'm gonna make it fair marks.
Start snowing. Mark. Thanks.
No, we'll make it fair marks.
If there are no
Try to change it up.
further administrative reports or questions, we'll go on to discussion and possible action, the 2023-2024 budget. And before we turn it over to Dr. McKinnon to walk through sort of his comments for tonight on the budget, just signposting a little bit. I know I sent a note to the board this afternoon. My goal is to walk out of here tonight with an issues list of the open issues that everybody still has with respect to the budget, what those questions are. So that the administration can come back to us on Thursday, close any of those loops as necessary, and in all likelihood be in a position to resolve the budget on Thursday unless there's some major open issues. So as you're going through our discussion tonight, keep track of things that you might need more information on, and when Dr. McKinnon is done presenting, we'll sort of start collaborating with that list.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Well, we did notice a few questions about class size. And I think that actually an interesting place to start tonight because watching kindergarten numbers closely and kind of what the big picture is there. So there was a survey that took place for the projected class sizes for next year. And we didn't get every district around us, but you can see, and I know that I apologize for that being quite small, but there were projected class sizes for Bethel, Brookfield, Easton, Monroe, New Fairfield, New Milford, Newtown, Oxford, Reading, Region 15, Region 6, Richfield, Wilton, Westport, Greenwich, and Western. So there's some Durgay schools in that reference group. There are some districts that are close to us, and there are also some districts in Durgay. You can see Easton and Reading. The blue bar is class size in K to 1, and so generally in Easton, you can see K1 is projected to be around 16 students next year in terms of class size. In grades 2 and 3 in Easton, it's 17 students, and in grades 4 and 5, that's expected to be 20. In Reading, it's actually pretty similar. The data that I last had was class sizes looking pretty favorably when we had 75 students projected from Dr. Crowder at about 15 students per class with 5 sections, 18 students in grades 2 to 3, and in grades 4 to 5, we had 20 students. if you look generally across those districts there, you can see that Easton and Reading are in pretty good shape in terms of our class sizes. The average for the districts that you see there in K-1 is 17.9, or about 18 students in classrooms in kindergarten and first grade. And you can see that if our class sizes were where they were, we would be 16 in Easton and 15 in Reading. So we have to circle back to that tonight based on that information. But in grades 2 and 3, the average was 20.1. And you can see that we were 17 in Easton and 18 in Reading. The average for grades 4 and 5 were 22 students. And you can see that we're averaging about 20 students in Easton and about 20 students in Reading. And you can see the various kind of low, medium, and high numbers for school districts around us. Region 6 was a bit of an outlier. You can see that probably brought the average down a little bit. With 10 students in grades K and 1 and 15 students in grades 2 and 3 and 4 and 5.
Where's Region 6?
Region 6 right here.
I think it's Litchfield. I just Googled it.
Wherever they are, they're, whatever you get the size of their district.
From the left, can't you read?
Yeah.
You know what the blue, red, and yellow bars?
Yeah. So I think during my presentation a few weeks ago, I said the general rule of thumb for class sizes in K and 1 was somewhere between 15 to 17 students would be an ideal class size. Between grades 2 and 3, the ideal class size would be somewhere between 17 to 20. And in grades 4 and 5, an ideal class size would be somewhere between 20 to 23 students. And class size is really kind of an individualized town feel, right? Think of class size as a dial. You can turn the dial slightly lower, you can turn the dial slightly higher. We don't really have class size policy here, where some districts say, at this particular class size, you must break to a 5th section or a 6th section or a 7th section of a particular grade level. And so, generally speaking, that rule of thumb, 15 to 17 in kindergarten, 17 to 20 in K 2 and 3, and 20 to 24 and 4 and 5 is probably a good number. And you can see here that we are kind of well within those acceptable ranges, and generally speaking, we're lower in those grade levels than kind of the districts that you see on the screen. Right? I do think we need to circle back to kindergarten in particular, because it doesn't appear that we're at 75 anymore, and we're climbing there.
My recollection is that Crowder projected about 90 for this year, and we missed way low, and then he projected basically our current enrollment again for next year, and it sounds like he might be missing the other one.
I just got the list, so I can't tell though by Cole's notes, like which are fully registered or not. It looks like we have 25 current preschool families, about 25 that are coming, that we assume the paperwork, and then another 24 that have completed registration. So it looks like if I'm reading everything correctly, but I will definitely finalize the numbers for Thursday. The list includes about 90 names. And it looks like around 50 are with the preschool are good to go. The preschool or siblings, current siblings of others.
And so that's, 49 that, are coming, right? And so the other 40, is it that you identified that they existed and sent them a packet, or they called you and requested a packet? How did that work? How do we end up with a packet?
Right, I'm not 100% sure. I know that some families have definitely reached out. We definitely had the kindergarten registration day that many families did come in, which was kind of advertised to like the community. So that is a question I can definitely ask Cole, like how did we get, because I'm looking at the list right now, there's 90 names on it.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, like some of the notes are, requested a tour, new inquiry, current sibling, waiting for land records. So it looks like the majority are in the process of at least starting the paperwork.
The conventional sort of phraseology we've heard in the past is packets out, packets received, and usually the yield is somewhere in between. And so if you sent 100 packets, you might expect 85 to show up. If we're talking about spending 90 packets, we might not be having 90 kids. We might be in that 75-ish range after all.
Sounds like a wedding, right? You might have 150, but you wait for 75 not to come.
So we're going to have to circle back to this for Thursday and we can provide much more kind of information.
If you can get last year's numbers, sort of the packets requested, and that would be the whole thing.
Yeah, I know our numbers last year were small, because our kindergarten class sizes are pretty tiny right now. I know, in just in my conversations, it was just that we've had either a lot of interest or a lot for this time of year.
Right, so it would, I think what Chirag is saying is that 75 students currently, did we send out 85 or 105 to get 7?
Where were we February 1st last year
Right.
compared to this year?
Before you move off this slide, Dr. McKinnon, how did you choose the group of, did you say these are the towns that touch us plus Durgay? What was this?
This survey was sent out initially from a Western superintendent, so superintendent close to us.
Yeah.
And it was getting some good data. And so because it was a Google sheet, I was able to take the Google sheet and actually target the Durgay school districts and say, can you please contribute this information as well? And so we were able to get kind of a snapshot, I guess, of kind of some districts in our area, like Bethel, Brookfield, Newtown, but also some Durgay school districts. Well, I guess Ridgefield is a Durgay school district, and in our area, the same as Wilton and Western. Although we don't have a 4th and 5th grade number for Western, that was left blank.
And Region 6 is going to fold, and so they're making the new Litchfield district. So that's the old Wamogo district.
Right.
More.
We could probably remove that. If we remove that set of data, the average goes up.
Yeah.
Like when you said the average was 17, there's only 3 that are 17 or below.
Right.
It seems to gravitate towards 18s and 19s.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, when you're dealing with 75 to 85 kids, you're either gonna hit low or you're gonna hit high. You're not gonna be able to say, I want exactly 18 and a half children.
Yeah, when you have 150, 200
When you have
kindergartners.
3 elementary schools, you have a whole different thing to
And you can choose. And what percentage of the schools do you think have a policy about when you create a new classroom?
I don't know.
Your experience as you've gone through.
I can tell you that I was a principal in Ridgefield for 10 years and we had a class size policy. And so I knew, we knew what the benchmark was. Sometimes that policy is even included in the teacher contracts. Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes they're guidelines.
And sometimes it's not a policy, sometimes it's more of a,
this is our goal.
Oh, did the policy sit out with the ideal numbers that you were describing before?
in Ridgefield, it had a policy where it specifically said that we will have up to 24 students in a 5th grade class, and the 25th student in any class will break it to a new section. So that's generally how the policy is written.
But, done, you have 5 or 8 times the number of 5th grade students. So when you break a section, it brought everybody down maybe 1 or 2 students, right?
Well, there were 6 elementary schools.
Yeah.
And so a lot more elementary school students, let's say 2,000 elementary school students, 6 elementary schools. But you only had maybe 3 or 4. So the same problem existed.
Right,
So
you're not doing this at each school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus one.
Right.
So it's similar.
It's similar. Yeah, it's similar. You have, we have 5 sections of each grade level approximately. And they would have 3 or 4 sections of each grade level. Generally, and maybe some outliers or some bubbles that go up and down, right? But, class size, I think the community's probably valued that over the years and you're in really good shape based on these data. And you just need to pay close attention to enrollment, and I think that's a good conversation to have tonight. I agree with it.
57 are pre-registered currently right now.
Sounds like the data's coming in.
Yeah.
How many, 25 were pre-registered?
Season for I think 57 pre-registered students for next year in Power School already, and this includes our current pre-K students. I don't have last year. But I can,
We can try to break that down for you.
yeah.
I don't think last year's matters much anyway, but you had a lot of people pulling kids out of school and homeschooling because of COVID and various other reasons. Might be a very difficult comparison.
All right, so that's just some general questions about class size in general that we pulled from the survey. And just a recap, what we did at the last meeting, the big change was we looked at health insurance. And Brown & Brown recommended that we budget health insurance at a 27% increase, right? We talked about how we really started at a 12.5% increase when we presented the budget, when we started developing the budget in December and early January. And then based on kind of claim trends and more recent information and how we looked at our health benefits account and so on, we came up with option B, which was to decrease the increase really from 12.5% down to about 5.02%, right? So we chose option B. And as a result, we created the sandbox where we said our overall budget increase was 5.46, but with reducing healthcare from 12% down to 5%, that brought our budget down to about 4.5%, almost a full percentage point. And then we started to have conversations about the request for a part-time nurse, the request for a full-time custodian. We started to float the idea of prepaying some of the VERIP payments up to $45,000. And you recall the presentation by Mr. Ponte and his special education enrollment, where she requested 2 special education teachers, and we recommended funding at least one of them through the IDEA grant. So just to recap, that is where we ended the last meeting. And we have some ideas for where you could start the conversation in the sandbox this year, tonight, which is continuing with the healthcare option B, the nurse, reducing the 1.0 custodian request to 0.5, paying the bearer. And this is, and the changes at the bottom there, the special education teacher 1, the special education teacher 2, and the Kubota are really where you can make some changes. So we left it around 4.5, 4.23. If you cut one of the requests for one of the 2 special ed teachers and fund the other special ed teacher, then you'll bring the budget down below 4 at 3.94. And if you purchase the Kubota this year rather than next year's budget, and we feel like we could probably do that based on some things in the budget this year, we're already down to 3.88.
Were other things, did other things move between last month and this month? Because those numbers look different when you flip slides. I thought we were at 3.8 something, and now it needs another reduction to get down to 3.8.
I thought we were at 4.2.
No, we're, I see 387.
Yes, but you didn't, this was the previous meeting. You didn't agree on all of these things. Some of the things you agreed on, some of the things you kind of said, can we hold off and talk about that?
What I'm wondering is, when you take healthcare B, nurse, custodian, bearer, and special ed teacher, you get to 387. On the next slide, you've done all of that, and another special ed teacher, and you're still at 388.
There's no second. Pretty sure we're at healthcare option B on the next slide.
Yeah, we are, yeah.
B, nurse, custodian, bearer, special ed.
It's different even when you start at healthcare option.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
128
Sometimes
versus
a few of
213.
the numbers that Dr. McKinnon provided were a little bit higher in, than the actual, that we actually took out. So just a little tiny bit, just a little bit. So like maybe it was 27 instead of 30, like, so just a little, a couple $1,000 here and there, just some rounding is what that, so that's essentially what that is.
It still seems like it's half a point though.
Well,
Can you go
the
back
healthcare
one
was
more time? Yeah, I think you're at
213.
option
That's
A.
our healthcare.
Yeah, the healthcare option B was a lot higher on
It's
the other
it's our
side.
healthcare.
213.
So that's what's
Yeah.
bugging me.
I don't, I think it's our healthcare.
Yeah,
So-
see, that was 213.
Yeah, so there's there's $90,000 that didn't come out.
Hmm.
And option B says a decrease of 213,560.
Right.
And option A is 113,560. It seems like something funky was applied on the current month view.
B minus 213,560.
Oh, I think the next slide is option A.
It's option,
Yeah.
it's because of.
Yeah. That's the difference. Oh, no.
No, it's a different number altogether.
But it's like a 20 different number.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
it's different.
213.
Okay. So we just need to, well, this is a static picture.
Right.
That I snapped. But really, if you go into the reduction,
It's all correct.
if you go here, no, it's still, yeah, so it's there, we still need to change
It's right.
it.
Change that to 213.
So if we go to healthcare option B, let me just make sure that it was changed. So we took it to. Okay, so right now it is at 8%. So it is at 8%. Are for our healthcare at the moment. In the actual.
Reducing 128 gets you to 8%.
It gets you to 8%. So if we, here, Chris. I'll just share this.
We have.
Oh, yeah, it's been 85,000, so option B changed.
So option B, so that's the deduction because you had taken some other things off. So in the actual, if you, Dr. McKinnon, if you'll click on,
Oh, I see. If-
okay. If
Option
you
B,
actually click on
option
where it
B,
says,
option B was a 5% increase, option
Yes.
B here is an 8%
Yes.
increase.
so if you click on healthcare option B, click on where it says, go down where it says healthcare option B.
Tell me the cell,
Click on cell
Right to the left.
E17.
E17, right? Hold on. There we go.
I feel like it's battleship.
That's.
Click there.
Yeah,
Okay, there we go. Okay, so when you click on those particular cells, you will notice that it's, that
it's an 8%
it's
increase.
an 8%. So if you click on the proposed, click on the 23, 24. Click on I6.
I6.
No, I'm sorry, 8, the other way, H6. Sorry. And now click on J. So
J6.
that's how much it was. This is how much it is now. So you can see that it is at 8%. So that is an 8% increase to the healthcare lines. We can make that a 5% increase if people are feeling like you would like to see that. But
Well, that's
right
what we
now,
talked about last month.
it is at 8%. There was some discussion about that. I changed it during the meeting. So if I was supposed to be 5 and I was supposed to be 8, I apologize, but that is what we had. I can go back and watch it, I suppose, or we can change it to be 5% if that's what you're
I
feeling
think we
comfortable
were,
with.
we were comfortable with the 5% given where the numbers are going. I think Mike had a concern about that number, but I don't think you were saying it should be less.
I think I was coming in at 8 and Mike was coming in lower.
Yeah,
You're talking about in the health insurance
Yeah.
Yes.
increase? Yeah, I mean, just to play between the Brown and Brown recommendation every year, which is always very high. And could probably stand by itself with no reserve. But then we have a reserve, right? And then in general, and I'm moving off of health insurance for a minute here. What amount of surplus is everybody comfortable with?
Is the surplus column D?
Overall, end of year, close out June, and what's the surplus that we're comfortable with?
for the reserve,
No,
just in general.
in general, like, how do you want Jason to budget? Right to 100%, where we have a zero surplus? No, that doesn't sound like a good idea, right? But, should we have a $1 million surplus? You know, that's kind of like, 5% of the overall budget, right? Should we have $500,000 left over? Should we have anything left over at the end of the year? Putting the reserve aside, I'm talking about the rest of the
Yeah.
operating budget. How close should we get?
Theoretically, we should get to 100%, meaning, which means we budgeted and predicted very well. Not realistic, but that would be the idea.
Well, I'm not even talking about, yes, you're right, not realistic, but is it even a good idea to budget it that close? I think we want a little bit left over. There's a little bit of room, so we aren't always with sweaty palms coming into, sliding into June, wondering if we're gonna have to ask for more money. But I don't think that number is 10% of the budget.
Well, how do we run to take every year prior?
There's always been, some surplus, and it's gone from, say, almost nothing to 6%. What's the most that you remember?
I feel like,
Maybe even higher.
it depends if you're talking about net of repaying health claims, right?
No, I'm not.
If you're talking about straight for that,
We're separate of that.
we'll see. If you said at the end, we're sitting here in June and there's $1.5 million, we're gonna stick $750 in health insurance and call $750 the unspent, you would call that 1.5.
Yes.
I would think that's a fiction, and I'll tell you why. Because of the way that we fund health insurance, the reserve is fictitious and exists purely as a claims fund.
Yeah.
And so we're borrowing against it at the beginning of the year because we haven't received funding from the town yet. And we run that reserve into a negative for a long period of time until we have to basically return that money at the end of the year to make it whole. So to say that that's unspent at the end of the year in some sort of, it's a surplus terminology would be incorrect.
It would be especially easy if we had a number, just a number that we hit every year, like for that surplus, like it's gotta be 500 every year, right? Then you would know, you would top it up and you would call the rest of it surplus.
Well, I mean,
Because if you spent that, the reserve down before you got reimbursed, but you always top to the same amount, then you would really be talking
but
about.
you're never gonna chop the same amount because the cost of claims is always gonna increase and the projected reserve is always gonna be as a function of claims. And so that number is always gonna have to increase about 10%.
If you did, if you made that, well, that's what we've been doing, that we say it's somewhere between 2 and 3 months of claims. Right? And claims vary every year. All I'm saying is that we should expect Dr. McKinnon to have a little bit left over at the end of the year, health insurance aside. Or even after topping out, there should be just a little bit left over. And I'm just saying, I'm comfortable with a lower number on the health insurance because I know we have a large reserve. I think we're plugging a big number. We hear Brown and Brown telling us, and we see the graphs about how the claims go, and they kind of, you have bad years and you have some good years. Plus we have our standard surplus. We haven't come anywhere close, even in bad claims years. We haven't come, like last year was a horrible claims year for us.
So what's your percentage number that you think would be? Chris, you're on 8, so I want to know why.
I'm just letting you know, I'm comfortable with a lower number than what we have on the screen. Even lower number than the 5%, because we have the reserve, and because we know that, Dr. McKinnon is budgeting smartly with a little bit of room, and we've got Sarah watching the numbers, who's not gonna let us get surprised late in the year.
But we don't have 5%.
Right, no, we have 8 there. I was comfortable with the 5. Chris, you said you wanted the 8. So I wanted to-
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that in a moment. I just want to respond to this question about, we always sort of have a surplus at the end of the year, so I'm comfortable with various things. Something that Scott Rice said about 5 years ago resonates in that respect, which is we don't have a choice but to come in the black. So you can't say, I'm gonna land the plane at 0. You've always got to land the plane somewhere above 0 because you can't get to June and say, I'm not making payroll because I don't have enough money in the bank. And so it's a little bit different than saying, I'm trying to target to a number and maybe I'll have a variance of 1% of a loss or 1% of a profit. You don't have that choice. You're gonna be above that line, basically no matter what. And so,
I was trying to say that in less eloquently, but what I'm trying to say is that we have several backstops. That's one of them.
and so then in the context of saying last year, we had a horrible claims year and we still landed the plane above ground.
And give some money back to the ground.
Because we didn't have a choice and because we went into panic mode this time last year. And we didn't spend on things that had been budgeted for, and we didn't do things that we would have done otherwise, because we said, stop the presses, we're gonna run out of money because of the health insurance problem. And so that's where we get into this sort of push-pull at this time of year when we say, oh, we always have extra money, but the money should always go back to the town. And then we say, I'd like to budget $100,000 for strategic priority X. And we say, well, that's absurd, because now the budget's 3.9%, so we gotta take it out. And then we get to the end of the next year and we say, good news, everybody, because electricity prices weren't as much as we thought, we've got $100,000. Oh, now we can either pay and spend on that strategic priority, we all agree we wanted to, but couldn't because we had to budget too much for insurance, or electricity, or we have to send it all back to the town, in which case we never progress. And so that's the real push-pull about, at the end of the year, what do you want the superintendent to be doing? Do you want the superintendent to be taking none, some, or all of the money that is left over, that was allocated by the town for the purpose of bettering our schools, for the betterment of the schools, or to put them back into a town, general fund that's clicking at 20% of operating? That's kind of the question.
Yeah, that's part B of what I wanted to discuss tonight, to lead to, maybe getting to a decision on Thursday. Part B was, what do you do at the end of the year? What is past practice? Past practice is you do one of two things. You and it's an and/or. You top up the health insurance and you return the money to the town, or, one or the other. But those are the only two things that we've done in the past. There hasn't been either a rush to spend down that I'm aware of, or a bringing back in of strategic priorities that were not voted on during budget season, like, oh, remember this, we cut this, let's bring this forward. I think technically we probably can, and you can give us the legal on that, is that legal? It probably is, but I think it falls into that category of just because we can doesn't mean we should. Now you can make the argument about, but we'll never progress.
Right, and we'll never progress under that mentality unless we also say we're comfortable bringing, if we were comfortable saying every year we're gonna bring a 5% budget to the town, the 5% budget is gonna include $250,000 for strategic priorities A, B, and C, and we're gonna fund those no matter what. And then at the end of the year, we say, we've accomplished our strategic priorities, and because we funded it at 5%, we still have $300,000 left. Here it goes back to the town. But if you're saying, I'm going to cut strategic priorities from my budget because I don't think the town is willing to or can afford a number that high, then you're in a constant cycle where you're never actually addressing those priorities. And I think that
Do
what's
you
different
feel like
about
Dr. McKinnon has done that, cut the strategic priorities this year?
well, I think what's different about this year than past years is that we now have these strategic priorities. And I think that it is very much a work in progress to say, when there are budget requests, how are they tied to these strategic priorities, and what is important uses of those funds? And we're seeing that through the development of this process. And I think we're going to see that the development of the next year as this works through too. I know in a few of the questions that I asked the administration, I was sort of saying, hey, we're doing this, how does this align with this priority? And can we take this out if we're doing this? Because the more we budget to those priorities, the more faithful we can be to our priorities. And frankly, the more defensible is the wrong word, but true the budget is to what we envision the school to be.
I trust more than ever that the priorities are in there.
I think so too.
Because of the planning
Yeah.
process that we went through. That planning process has started and kind of faded a few times during my tenure, but this one started and finished and then was communicated to the community. I feel like
And the
they're in
decisions
there.
were made during that process of what to punt for later because we couldn't afford it now.
Right, it's
And
a
if we
diet.
have an opportunity where, hey, we got, we saved money on healthcare, we have these funds, let's move those from the future to now. Right, as opposed to saying, we had it in the future, so we'll go back to it later. At the end,
That we're not investing in now, we should be talking about it and deciding whether to put it in. I mean, we shouldn't be saving money to
Sure,
invest in things
what did we
later.
talk
Yeah.
so you were doing your presentation on sort of the timelines for projects and where they fall in priorities. There were, I couldn't tell you what, this was probably three meetings ago. There were priorities that we put off for, second year. One of them was the second or third layer. That was at the last meeting. Before that was, there were some, facilities priorities. There have been things where we talked about saying, hey, look, this is a long-term thing versus a now thing. And the thing I was asking.
I just don't remember the financial aspect of that decision-making process. I think it was like, we can't do this entire thing in 1 year. We can't put that on.
There's stuff like layers of curriculum coordination, for example. If you can
Right.
say, our goal over the course of 5 years is to build out that curriculum layer by bringing in curriculum coordinators, by reimagining the way that we do that. That's all gonna have a financial component. I think we've heard at the tri-board, Dr. McKinnon said basically, I get that I can't ask for all of this all at once, because no one's gonna say, great, let's have a 20% increase, because, you know, that all sounds great. And so the advantage of the strategic priority process is we've got more or less a roadmap and a menu that allows you to say, hey, good news, everybody, we beat the health insurance budget by $150,000 this year, and because we gamble on it every year, this year we beat it by $150,000. The result of that is we can go to this menu and we can say, we always wanted to invest in upgraded project adventure materials, whatever it is. We can pull it off the board and we can pay it out of this unspent funds. And that's a philosophical departure from, I will give it all to the town, or I will put it in health insurance.
It is.
And the question is that the better way to long-term move the district forward versus a process where we say we are budgeting this $150,000 and the result of that budget, $150,000, is a 6% budget this year, knowing full well that that will become a lightning rod for a variety of reasons. And then it comes out, and then we rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Or do we say, we are being faithful to our best estimates with respect to what health insurance is going to cost us? I'm just using that as an example. It's a big mover of which we have very little control. Then there are years we're going to lose, there are years we're going to win. And on the years that we win, are we using that win to invest in schools if that's the money that's already been invested in education? And quite frankly, that also begs the secondary question, which is, would our district benefit? And I think it would, doing what a lot of other districts do, which is have these non-lapsing accounts that allow you to set aside 2% a year of unspent funds, which then can be targeted for these strategic priorities. And also at the same time, it incentivizes administrations to not spend every dollar, because you can save that 2 points every year and do something.
That's where I think the debate belongs, and it's probably not just in this room. I mean, we can talk about it in this room. But I think that's a large debate within the community and the town with the other boards. I was going to make the argument that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the new behavior of pulling, large expenses forward, like the Barrett at 45,000. We haven't done that in the past. I know we pulled. I think we repaired items. We did this last year. We repaired things that broke. We pulled the Barrett forward. I don't remember.
Can I just say that we didn't mean to confuse you with the option A, option B language, right? I think at the beginning of last meeting, we talked about various options and we said option A, option B. And I think what confused us this time is that we carried forward that option. But really, I think what you decided at the end of last meeting is to keep health insurance around 8%. And what Sarah did that night was actually go into the budget and set it at 8%. So it started off at 27, then it went down to 12, and then it went to 8.
I think I recall doing some cocktail napkin math that came up to about the same number that Sarah had come up to, that was about 8%. And I don't think we all said, yeah, let's do that. I think that's sort of where the conversation ended, even though there were some people who were on different sides of that.
So really, this where we are right now, just to kind of, we can take, let's not call it healthcare option B, let's call it, reduction. And
Healthcare 8%.
For 8%, not even.
You can plug any number you want.
Healthcare
That's the 8%.
set at 8%. So really,
Apologize.
we're reducing the increase by 128,000, which means it's set at 8%, which means we're bringing the budget down to about 4.92. And then you can see the various other options. But really, the big rocks are the health insurance number And we talked about whether it should be 8% or 5%, but I think we left it at around at 8%. And then the other increases, and then that, you know, you can see it's hovering down in the down the 3.8 range, but it sounds like we potentially could have to add, we have to look at this, kindergarten teacher, or even just, we have X number of sections at Reading Elementary School, we may need one more section, whether that's in kindergarten or not, which means it's gonna go, the budget is gonna go back up into the 4s again, so.
I just wanted to follow up on my question over to Chris about the 8%.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
comfortable with the 5, so I wanted to know why.
Yeah, I came to the 8%. Doing the math over here based on. Projected year-over-year increases and looking at the projection for current year spend coming in at. Under $3 million, whatever the number was, and then adding 13% to that $3 million, which created an 8% year-over-year increase because of the way that this current year was budgeted versus what next year would be. It would be an 8% increase to reflect a 13% increase in claims.
And we, at that point, we also forecast claims from now until the end of the year at the $250,000 per month.
And if it comes in less than that.
Right.
Well, I mean, we're also really projecting claims for 8 to 24 months from now, or 18 months from now. So the way that we balance spend out this year doesn't really impact what we budget for next year,
Right.
except, you know.
And so the downside of going too far low is if it is higher, we end up having to pull from other products.
Then we're in this cycle of using unspent funds at the end of the year to cover the health, right? And we just.
Okay. Right. In an ideal world, I would love to say that we have $750,000 sitting in the health insurance claims fund that we never touch. And we just use budgeted money and employee contributions to pay claims every year. And never the twain shall meet. But for a variety of reasons, including cash flow, we're constantly living in this morass.
Well, why can't we budget that as well, to build it over the course of however many budget cycles?
I think we could get there right now if we wanted to. It becomes a question of how the cash comes and goes. But if we were to do that, then we would say, are we budgeting the Anthem number, the Brown and Brown number, or something else? Because we're always guessing. And Mike's hedge is, let's hedge low knowing we have the backstop.
I'm saying multiple backstops.
Right. My thought was, let's project the 13% annualized increase that the market is projecting to see against our current projected year. And that results in an 8% year-over-year increase that theoretically would never have to touch the reserve.
No, that makes sense. And actually, now that I'm thinking of it, actually, I don't like the idea of the backstops being, we're end up pulling from other places.
Well, one of the backstops, health insurance reserve.
But the next one is freezing like we did last year.
Is surplus.
Right?
Yeah, no, that would be a third, you know.
Well, no, it's not.
Through surplus.
You can't use the surplus to backstop the health insurance because you have to make those decisions in February.
Yeah,
March,
you
and
don't
April.
know it's a surplus.
You don't know you have a surplus until June, so you've got to stop the presses now to make sure you can pay the health claims. And that's what results in sort of a false surplus at the end of the year.
Well, we also know that they're trending down from last year.
They have, and so we used the trended down numbers with the projected
Right.
growth increase that everyone's expecting across the board. And so that's where we got the 8% instead of 13, which is what the
The 13% being, procedure A costs, 10,000 this year, and that same procedure next year is gonna cost 13% more. So we take our current claims and blow them up by 13, which.
Right, if we
That's how
assume,
Chris
if we
derived it.
assume 3 million, if we assume 3 million in claims, add 13% of that, that's, $3,400,000 next year, whatever it is. Because we budgeted more than 300 now, we budgeted, or 3 million now, we budgeted 3.2, whatever it is, to get to 3.45, you only need 8% instead of 13%.
So I have a question about the special ed teacher, Dr. Thing. Every time we talked about the special ed programs here, we've always said that the investment we make in pays off a bigger ROI than we're spending. And so not making that investment, we're essentially burdening ourselves with a bigger cost in the future.
Right, we don't know that.
Right, yeah, no, some, correct assumption?
Well, I think that there's two types of special education teachers. There's a special education teacher aimed at addressing referrals for the number of students you have in the district and students that are classified as one of the areas of eligibility. And there are also special education teachers that can also be focused on meeting those students' needs within a certain program, those for our most intense students. And those students potentially save sending students for costly outplacements. And I think that the presentation last week was more about meeting the needs of the numbers of referrals and the number of students that we currently have. We already have the basic program and the bridges programs in place at Reading Elementary School, Drummond Middle School.
But it was early intervention, right, for those, the things we talked about with younger kids. Right, and so that, when I look at it, I'm looking at that early intervention means you're gonna have more kids to stay in the regular program, in the regular classroom in the future, therefore saving you money, even if it's not necessarily an outplacement.
The IEPs are gonna drive hours of service, put all the hours of service together, that's gonna drive how many people you need. I think this might be Jen's, tell me if this is Jen's forward-looking view of what are the IPs going to say for next year, and am I going to have enough staff to meet that, demand. Right. We've got the basis program right off to the side, but the IPs say we need to provide this level of service, this number of hours per student, which drives that organization. So this is Jen predicting, like, you know what, I think based upon what we're looking at in the IEPs, she can't know this early, probably. We're gonna need 2 more teachers. Is that how that ends up being like that?
Yeah, I think, Jen, you were talking about the number of special education students we have now, but also looking at some referrals that could turn into special education students. And so that's what the debate was last month, right? It was the numbers of students plus referrals equals this many teachers.
Right, we also look at the number of sessions that each student gets, not every IEP has the same weight. So what we're seeing, I think what we're seeing in terms of the trend right now is that, a lot of our grade level, students that are meeting, they're being perfect. So, I mean, our basic population is pretty stable. We have a pretty good predictor, I would say, for the next year of who's going to be in our more intensive program. The programs where we're seeing the highest referral are the ones that keep the students in their classroom more of a higher percentage of the day. They need the reading support, they need the writing support, they need the math support. So when you look at, that's where we're seeing all of our referrals right now, coming out of those students, and they are placed in the gen ed class for a significant portion of the day. So then we have to be able to support those students in the classroom using pushing in a pull-up model.
So what happens if you don't have that support, or the first and second order consequences?
Is
What
that,
happens if you don't have
Yeah,
that?
so like say that you don't have, we cut the 2 teachers, what happens?
So basically what would happen is, we have to provide support for the students. So then the question becomes, how can we distribute them? So let's say, for instance, we have 6 sections or 4 sections of a class. And then we have to look at how realistic is it for a teacher to go into X number of sections. So what we will probably see are probably greater concentration of special education students in maybe 2 classes or 1 class. We normally would be able to spread them out.
So you have a group of knowns. As much as things can be known, those are the students that have an IEP right now. And then you have these referrals coming in. Are the referrals on a schedule, or is this something that happens randomly? A referral can happen at any time, and it could generate an IEP for next year, which would drive hours of service.
first we have to talk about our known variables. You are correct. We know the students that we've had annual reviews for, so we can easily predict, these students that we need a program for next year.
Yeah.
Our wild cards are the parent referral. So a parent can refer a child at any time to special education. So when those referrals come, we have to do our due diligence, the testing and, if they meet criteria, we have to, of course, provide them with an IEP. Our other unknown variable always is the parents who move in over the summer. That is usually where we see a lot of, should we say, interesting changes in our numbers, depending on if families move in during the course. But we also work very closely with the SET team, the student intervention team, so we do have an idea of which students are moving through the tiers. So usually when a student hits that tier 3, we sort of know if they don't make progress within X amount of time, that we most likely will see a result.
So it sounds like the staff is referring early enough and communicating already. So the wild cards are move-ins over the summer or parent referrals of students that hadn't reached that level of intervention, technically, but the parent is saying, no,
Correct.
they are in our mind, so, okay. And just to close out the whole thing, those 2 special ed teachers are a need that you're predicting for next year, based upon referrals and unknowns, those last 2 things we talked about.
That, and we're also looking at, we have caseloads, so we know which grades, have a higher caseload number. So we really do try to keep, we try to spread out our special education students. So like, for example, we know that, say, 3rd grade or 4th grade, we know there's going to be a higher number of students, so we're factoring that into our discussion as well. It's hard to put one teacher across 2 grade levels.
So
because they have different academic times and support stuff.
So if you end up short, one of the ways that you mitigate that is you have more special ed students in one classroom in front of that existing teacher. Is there a maximum you can't exceed?
50%.
50%.
State maximum on that? Is that where that comes from, or is that like? Huh?
It's the federal.
Federal, okay.
We try to keep it, honestly, we try to keep it like between 3 and 4 per what they need. So for example, if they need reading and writing support, we say teacher A really should not be working with more than 3 or 4 students. Of course, that number changes over time. Our bridge students, we want to integrate them as much as possible in the classroom. But, we have to group them in a certain way so that they can get their supports.
That makes sense.
So,
As it relates to the 2 teachers, then what would the difference be?
I
Seeing,
didn't hear you, John.
as it relates to the 2 teachers on the board, then the 2 that are being requested, what does the final result end up being? 3 students versus 5, 1 versus 6?
I think you're talking about 2 different things. You're mixing caseloads for special education teachers. We have the 50% threshold. So maybe
Right,
one of
so
the 2 of you can explain the
the
caseload.
difference in caseloads might be instead of 8 or 9 students, 11 to 12, 12 to 13 students on a caseload. And then figuring out how to split those students.
I feel like this is back to a question from last month about seeing what a special educator's so their schedule looks like to help understand where
Maybe
the needs are.
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
just to put a point on what Mike was asking, so do you know that you need both teachers, or you know that you need one and you're guessing you'll need the other one?
We were asking for 2 teachers because we needed one for RES, considering the, where we see the packets of spikes.
So you know that.
Yeah, the other one is for John Reed, because we know our 4th grade class size, that's moving up. And middle school programming is very different than elementary programming. So, we have to take into account schedule, co-taught classes, we have different options. So one would actually for RES to support the referrals we're seeing in that building. But we also know a very large 4th grade cohort that's moving up to grade 1.
So I think we're definitely identifying an issue for further clarification on Thursday to understand what the assignments of these teachers would be. So I understand that in fifth grade, there's already a special educator assigned to the fifth grade team, so the extent to which we're talking about fourth and fifth grade, what that changes, I'm not totally following. But I think that'll be helpful to resolving this. I'm starting to come around to thinking about if kindergarten enrollment is in a questionable area, and if one or two special educators in a questionable area, whether or not we're starting to talk about a contingency of saying, here is budgeted money for a position, and over the summer, the administration can have to decide where the need is.
I would agree with that approach. I am looking at the request for 2 special education teachers. Last month, we said, let's fund 1 using the grant. I'm leaning towards reducing the request from 2 to 1 based on the numbers that I saw in last month's presentation. And instead identifying contingency of $68,000, which could be either used for that second special education teacher or for a kindergarten teacher, and not really getting into the weeds about whether it's one or the other.
It's all guessing.
And just basically playing that out longer, but putting the FTE there in that position. And so what that looks like budget wise,
And it could be neither.
yeah, well, if the kindergarten numbers are where we think we are based on the number of packets sent and received, and then we kind of get you some information about that, right? Then, one way you were talking about providing intervention students for students is to keep classroom at a manageable level. And I already said that the number of kindergarten students is generally accepted to be around 15 to 17, and we can't go anywhere near 20, because then that could impact interventions and the ability for teachers to provide services for students and so on.
So if we hit 85 students, we have 17 across 5 sections.
Did you do a slide on that? For tonight, I thought I heard you say you did a slide.
A slide on one?
A slide on class size.
Yeah, we saw it earlier.
Yeah, I did.
We were well below.
I told
that
that
one.
this was the
Okay.
slide I talked about, yeah.
Okay.
And so if our numbers, where are they? If the numbers kind of where they are, what we thought when we started, that's a great place to be in. But if our kindergarten numbers are hovering 80s, even in the 90s, then it changes from 15, 16 students in a class to closer to 20 students in a class.
How many sections do we have now? Bingo?
5.
5 in the budget for next year?
5 current year, 5 next year, right?
Okay.
And we had 5 this year because we were anticipating 85 or 90, whatever it was. And
90 brings you 18, right? 85 we're used to
So
17.
15 goes to 18.
I'm trying to
If
find.
it was 17, 85, 17, 90 is 18,
Right.
still looks good on the graph.
Right.
That's the first time we've seen that, a graph like that, by the way, thank you.
I honestly, I think that where you look between now and Thursday is, you ended last month at 8%. Mike, you're talking about somewhere in the 5% range. We could give you a look at somewhere in between, and then we could give you kind of the placeholder for a teacher, whether that teacher is a special ed teacher or an additional kindergarten teacher.
If you took, basically to get there, if you took out the 68, if you took out the removal of the special ed teacher, you're adding $70,000 back.
Right.
And if we're saying,
I'll take that out right now, and it's the same as the line above.
right, so you get to
4.23.
4.23.
And then it will be 4.16 if you pay for the Kubota
Right.
right now.
I forget, what was that for again?
The Kubota, to transfer.
Move mulch around.
Yeah. That's pretty strenuous activity. You need good machinery for landscaping. And moving on
Just have to
equipment.
swap your remove and your idea grant.
Yeah. I think we
Yeah,
should
I
take it
was,
out.
yeah, I was like that, yeah.
Like that at least your philosophy of what you want to do with the money at the end. Like we could, so the Kubota would be, we could purchase that out of funds that were not used from a very specific place that I can guarantee is not gonna be fully expended. And so in looking at that, I know exactly what we budgeted and what we budgeted for. And I know that we're not gonna happen to need it in that particular line item because it's not going to be expended due to some staff, that's a particular to staffing. And so the human resources said, you know, this is exactly where we pull it from and how much it would be. So that does speak to the philosophy everywhere of how you want to look at those, how you want to look at that. But I also will say that, again, we do not draw any funds down from the town until we actually have the outlet, we actually.
Similarly, if you look at
The
the,
variable is.
the variable 45.
Is exactly the same.
Yeah, right, I
So
know,
that's
and,
where-
and
that's
that's
where
a
it comes
philosophical
from. It's a
discussion I wanna have with this
philosophical.
group here. Because
It's left pocket, right pocket, to a certain extent.
I know, and it's it's July 1 versus June 30, right? But
What's your
Well, I
concern?
mean, it's, yeah.
It's money we have, we should be using it.
well, why don't we just spend it down to zero?
I think we
I'm
should.
happy to help you do that.
Why don't you?
June
Why not
30th.
ever?
Region, yeah, there are other, so it's a tri-district, right? So there's one particular district for whom the philosophy is, we will, this is our budget, this is what we have, we are going to use that money in the way that we intended,
So
and
it's not
if
us.
there's not, then
You knew it.
it's good, yeah.
Is
It's
that right?
it's however you want, it's however you guys want.
So no
Want to do.
surpluses returned to the towns
So whether or not you
in this other
return,
place that she'll have.
So Mike, if you return it to the town just to ask for them for it again, what is that?
because
I think it's a matter of making a decision on how we want to do this philosophically and being able to communicate that to the town, because right now, we don't communicate to the town that that's our objective and what we want to do at the end of the year. So when we do that at the end of the year, it looks like we're being shady.
We asked for this specific list of things. We didn't need all those things, and therefore, here's what we didn't need. Or you can say what we didn't need, what we didn't spend.
So last year, we asked for a specific set of things.
Yeah.
Got worried as the year was progressing and said, oh crap, we should stop spending, so cut things. And then we had that extra money left over.
Mhm.
But we should have used that money to spend on the things we said we were gonna.
Maybe, I haven't seen the difference between, I haven't seen what things we didn't spend the money on.
I think
That's a very granular level that I haven't been.
I think there's a difference though in, you get to the end of the year and you drop $100,000 on a new science lab. Okay? Where did the science lab come from? The science lab wasn't in this year's budget. The science lab wasn't in next year's budget. The science lab isn't in our strategic priorities. I think people get worried about that.
It wasn't debated, it wasn't voted
Right.
on in this body, it wasn't
Yeah.
voted on by
But
the
that's
town of
different.
Reading.
That's different than, hey, this is the budget for this year. This is a list of things we want to do, but can't do.
Yeah, so
Okay, we have extra money.
I think that, and that is why it's important to have a strategic set of priorities. That we talk about, these are the things we are gonna need either this year, next year, or the following year. And the same way when you get to a capital plan, sometimes you can pay for things in this particular year, sometimes you've got to move it. And sometimes you change the capital plan based on funds available, forecast, other variables. So if it's a science lab, I agree with you, it's not good, it's not transparent, it sends the wrong message. Because we haven't talked about this, but the VERIP is in the budget for next year. Like Eastern paid the third payment of their VERIP last year, and so they're not talking about it this year. It's already, they paid that last year. But that's why the strategic priorities are important, right?
In stuff like this, like the VERIP and the Kubota, I don't even know how to pronounce it, the mulch trailer. You've got $61,000. You could say that's quarter of a point on the budget, more or less. And could say, here's our options. I've got a 5.25% budget. Town, you can take that. Or, and I'll give you $61,000 at the end of the year. Or here's a 5% budget. I'm not gonna give you $61,000 at the end of the year.
Yeah.
You're giving it back to them to ask for it.
The only
But
difference.
they have use of it, and I know that you're aware, the rainy day fund over there, but they have use of that money until we ask for it back again. If the VERF is gonna get paid on July 1, then it's somewhat silly, right? But
Yeah, and it would, but the only practical difference is when you
Is that right?
turn it over to.
okay, so that would be a whole year there between when we return and when we ask for the VERF.
We don't ever, we never return because we never ask.
Not in the first.
So we
Right.
never have it. We never have.
We're gonna
it.
stop asking for it.
Well, we don't,
Okay.
yeah, we don't, and so we don't have any money.
Yeah,
We have nothing.
all right. Yeah.
It's just a-
We have to request it every time, so it's only when the request comes through as to when it hits in the calendar year. Because the town holds, the town holds all the money and only provides it when, so whether it's, June 30th or July 1, we only get it, exactly, we get it to the penny, on that day, and generally speaking on that. Yeah,
But the practical difference between a 5% budget with a $61,000 check or non-request on June 30th and a 5.25% budget where you don't draw that down is in an environment where the Board of Finance takes the view that we never use the fund balance to offset mill rate. You're gonna have a different tax rate based on 5 versus 5.25%. In one, you're gonna have a 5.25% budget, and the fund balance is gonna get a little bit higher. And on the other side, you're gonna have a 5% budget, and the fund balance is not gonna get a little bit higher, but everyone's gonna save $5 on their taxes.
Okay.
That's the difference. So if you can reduce the request for next year by accelerating some of these things, whether it's math curriculum, VERF payments, equipment that needs to be purchased, that everybody and their sister knows has to get paid at some point, then you can avoid the tax burden being shifted to taxpayers by paying it out of the money that's already been taxed and already been allocated to education in the current year. That's the argument for spending it down, not to zero, Sarah, but to a 5 or $10.
And it benefits the taxpayer.
I
I said, and it benefits the taxpayer, everybody wants.
I just think we should be more, like, that's what we're gonna do, say we're gonna do it and have a list of how we wanna spend it.
And Mike, if this town had a philosophy on the finance side of saying, selectmen didn't spend $250,000, schools didn't spend $250,000, $500,000 came back, great, we're gonna credit that against next year's mill rate, it'll be a different conversation. But they don't have that philosophy. And the result is a huge fund balance and incrementally increased taxes. And so if the goal is to keep the tax burden down, accelerating some of these where we can is the prudent choice for the taxpayer.
I think we all need to, necessarily need to agree, I don't think we're going to agree, but we need to understand, the difference between, every single dollar that we don't spend and we don't top up the health insurance goes back to the town, right? And then the next level is maybe we accelerate the VERF and then the Kubota, and then there's the science lab, and then we're spending it all, right? Whether we talk about it, right? There's the whole spectrum of how we can handle this. I think legally, we can probably do all of that, right? We can spend every penny, even on things we never talked about, and I would not be for that. I think
And I think what's unique
I'd be
about this
digging
situation,
my heels in like crazy.
what's unique about this conversation is that we're having it on February 7th. And I think that's really a credit to what the administration's done to manage the current year budget and make projections.
Oh, I agree.
All of that. And so in the past, the sort of criticism of, oh, it's the school district June spending spree. We could cast whatever aspersions we want on that as a poor practice or a positive practice, or whatever. But here, this is as in the open as daylight as possible.
And it's causing a conversation that, I think,
And so it's allowing us to have.
it's not criticism. Please don't, please don't be this wrong, but it's something I need to work through personally, and I would hope that you would want to as well.
It's allowing us to have conversations about how we can benefit from, sort of wins against budget right now in a way that allows us to make our budgeting even more precise going forward. And that, I think everybody's goal is to try to get to as a position where we're not over budgeting and we're not overtaxing at a, at a high clip. You're never gonna win because you can never go below zero. So, back, I think Scott Rice used to throw up his arms and say, I got you to 98%. 98% is pretty damn good on $23 million.
That's one of the reasons why I asked in that earlier question, like, what do you come with? 2%, that's a $500,000, right?
I mean, I'm comfortable with everything beating budget because we had a great year. I'd be thrilled if that were the case, but I'm also sort of pragmatic about the whole thing. You realize we're gonna win some and we're gonna lose some.
Yeah, and I'm not one of those people that says, oh my God, you had $1 million surplus. What's the matter with you people, right? No, I do take that as a win, but it's how are we gonna take it as a win? These decisions are how we do that. Is a win, the check that goes back to the town, is it some sort of partial?
Going through this process, so I always wonder how much the administration is not requesting to be mindful of being at a certain percentage, right? So to me, there's, okay, this bucket of stuff that falls off, that they're like, okay, this would be great, but we can probably live without it. Then we get to this point where we're sitting here looking at stuff to cut to try to get to a lower number. And each of those steps to me that's the bucket of surplus, right? And maybe that's how it should be cut. Like, as we're cutting this stuff, that's like, okay, well, if we have a surplus, this is where it's going. Would that be?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, would that make you more comfortable in that idea of, hey, okay, look, whatever excess is left, we now have a list of things that everybody knows about, that's very transparent about, that we can go to.
Comment or suggestion?
Please.
I think that, based on tonight, this second special ed teacher, I would change this to teacher. And I would remove this as a negative, which means it's negative 68,000 right now. I'd take that out. Which means the budget's going to go up, back up to 4.25. Yeah. Going to go back up to 4.25 because I've basically taken that negative out, put a teacher in there as a placeholder. So we've requested 2 special education teachers. We're going to fund one with the grant, and we're going to remove that as a reduction. I'll put the teacher in there.
Oh, you put on the wrong one. Okay.
Yeah,
That's fine. I get it.
It's fine.
Okay, and then what you can see, it goes back up to 4.23%, which is where it is here. And I think we should find that 68,000 here. The difference between the 5% and the 8%. And which would kind of bring us back down to kind of where I hoped that you could land.
3839,
Which is in the 3839 ballpark. So you can see right there with the Kubota, we're at the 3.8. And we just control Y. And again, and finding the 68,000. It's like Sarah, if you plugged in an additional 68,000 here, can you tell us what that percent would be and where that would be? Between 5 and right, it'd be somewhere in the center. So I'm just,
but I don't want to.
I think though that if you're going to do that, to Mike's point, you would want to make sure that everyone was in agreement that you would use the healthcare monies that you budgeted this year towards next year, because that's what you're saying.
That's what you're promising yourself.
That's what you're promising yourself. So I think that that's a really important thing to recognize, because if you just put in that number, you would not have sufficient funds. But if you take that money that you allocated this year and put it towards the healthcare, then you'd be in fine shape.
And so the way I see it, if we're gonna play that game basically, which is I'm borrowing against myself to pay myself back out of this claims fund, why not budget healthcare true at 8%? And take the $68,000 from the VERA, that there's additional VERA that has to get paid, the whole number was 130,000, whatever it was. Take 100,000 towards the VERA out of this year, and you get to the same place budget wise, and you're not sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul of health insurance. And so, but more broadly, I think something that Chirag and Mike were talking about has me thinking about budgeting in a slightly different context, which is in a world where you have strategic priorities, you're gonna have a budget, which is gonna be, here's what I need to continue exactly what I'm doing. It's the number of teachers, the number of light bulbs, the whole thing. That gets me to budget number X. Here's my list of strategic priorities. Here's what I want to get to 1 through 100. You now pull off of those menus on a year-over-year basis, based on how you get to a budget number you're comfortable with. And if you said that the year-over-year increase to do nothing new and to change nothing is 3%. To get my strategic priorities, the top 3 give me $150,000. Now I'm at 3.5%. That's what I'm comfortable with, and I'm moving down that list. It allows you to have sort of fidelity of purpose in saying, here's how I'm trying to work towards these priorities, and here's the impact that that has. And the impact that has is 1.5% a year, or 2% a year, or whatever it is, off of the whole thing. And then you can use that as a budgeting tool and a year-end spending tool to say, I'm always targeting these strategic priorities. That's always where it's going to be. And if you're budgeting healthcare with fidelity, and you're never using it as a bludgeon to move things around, then you're able to do that without as much risk. But I would be more comfortable taking $60,000 more from the 30-year VERA than from the health insurance line if all we're trying to do is achieve a number.
No, it makes more sense because it's so much of an unknown, you're better off estimating, trying to be at least accurate.
Right.
And
I know what the VERA number is, that's contractual.
Yeah. The only reason I suggested the 8 to 7 was because this month's claims number was much better than it was a month ago. But we do have another $85,000 or so in VERA funds that you could either pay this year or next year, right? So
Without saying I'm borrowing against my health insurance.
without touching
That's
that.
And so,
So if you'd like, we can, for Thursday night, get more information about kindergarten class size, registered, expected, packets received, packets sent, and so on. And we could float more VERA options up there, where you can see. You can keep healthcare at 8%, and then you could make a decision whether you want to change class size in kindergarten or just keep it at a teacher and decide between a special education teacher and a kindergarten section.
You wanted to see the special education teacher schedule
I
for the day.
yeah, I do, but I wanted to sort of ask generally whether that would actually be informative to people, because I don't want to make work amongst a number of different situations, because if
I know
we're.
she's trying to predict something, she doesn't have all the data right now.
But it sounded like she more known than the way you're making it sound.
Because a month ago, I had an argument.
Yeah, so if you look at the number of students, that is correct. But when she says wild card, that could be somebody that needs a little extra math help or somebody that needs to be outplaced. That person could move in over the summer. So it's truly a wild card.
But that's not what, she's not asking for that teacher because of the wild card. She's asking for the teacher based on what is known in RES and
Fourth grade, it's moving up to fifth grade.
This is what you really debated, might be. These are the projected number of the students. Right, for next year.
Right. It's
We
the
really
really change in
changed
fifth
this.
grade from 10 to 14.
Mhm.
That's really where the delta is.
But she knows that because of the fourth.
Because she knows they're sitting in fourth grade right
Yeah,
now.
I know.
Right, but that means that each sees just one more student. So I don't know how many teachers there are, but if you just see one more student.
I just, upon further reflection, I still think that this is in, these numbers here for the grade level are still within acceptable limits. for kind of where we have now. That's kind of why I mentioned before the idea of,
You notice that we're near the federal limit, right?
yeah.
Not that we ever want to be, right?
No.
Nowhere near, okay.
Well, again, though,
It's 50%.
that's something very different. So this is talking about as special education's teacher caseload. The federal limit refers to how many special education students can be in a general education class with general education peers. And we would never want to load a class for many reasons, but yes, there is some federal law to inform limits on that.
But when you have a special education teacher that's in a general ed class serving, let's say, 3 students who, their IEP says they need to have an hour each, right? You could also serve 4 students
Oh, sure.
and you're giving them their hour, right? So they are related.
Yes, they're related. At the elementary level, we're talking about middle school. At the elementary level, this is sort of more relevant because the kids tend to stay in one homeroom class. And so that's where the student makeup is something we want to keep an eye
So
on.
what I'm hearing is that the first special educator that we're proposing to fund with the grant, that will be the RES position. Is that correct, Jason?
Well, I would,
The first one to be cut is the John Reed one.
right,
Okay. So then I think what it sounds like would actually be helpful is understanding what function that teacher would be serving next year in a world where we've got a team that already has a special educator attached to it. What does that look like?
Mhm.
Because that plus if Melissa comes back and says, last year there were only, there were 60 packets returned right now, and there's 57 returns now, maybe this 90 is a pie in the sky. Maybe we're not as concerned about the $70,000 fall.
right.
Because I'm hearing that administration isn't sold on needing 2 special educators.
That is what you're hearing from the superintendent.
So let me just clarify the request that in terms of understanding the daily schedule, that's more for the elementary position or the middle
Because
school?
that's the one that's in dispute.
Yes.
But is it, I mean,
But it's also-
you're comfortable with it.
But it's kind of moot if I just think that you could look at a special ed schedule, but I'm kind of saving you that work by saying,
If you don't want it.
Yeah, if
let's
you're
take it out.
saying if you're comfortable with it, then why are we debating?
I think we should
I-
take that.
I'm more worried about, class size in kindergarten than I am in special education.
And we have 5 teachers there in the budget. We could go to 108 and still be at
And
18.
here's the other thing.
There's been 108 teachers.
Yeah. Here's,
No, I might have said that back. We could go to 108 students and still be at 18 per class.
the other point that I'll make to you is that we have added special education teachers during the year, after the year started. We don't add classroom teachers after the year started, right? But we do add an extra para if we need one, we add an extra BT if we
It's
need
easier to
one.
address that in the.
We add an extra spec, so we have, and that's why when I presented the budget to you, I've said we added a special education teacher after the year started. So if we need to add a special education teacher, we'll add a special education teacher next year. I don't think we need to start the year with 2. I think we can start the year with 1, which is grant funded through the IDEA, and that's where we land.
When you do add a special ed teacher in the middle of the year, where are you pulling the money from?
It's $68,000 in a $20-something million budget, and so we have to, sometimes we can find it through breakage, depending on whether we fill substitute positions or.
A veteran teacher leaves, a new teacher gets hired, there's 50,000, you do a little bit better on the heating oil, there's some money.
More of a question, you're not, costing yourself somewhere else.
Right,
That's what that, because you're essentially forced to do it, right?
yeah. So do you think that's fair?
Yeah.
So let's sort of summarize it at 9:15 with what are the questions that we need to bottom out on?
I'm gonna take this after that's actually a slide. I'm gonna actually bring up this is actually the worksheet.
So I think number 1 is where's the consensus on healthcare percentage? Somewhere between 5 and 8%.
Right.
Number 2 is class sizes at the elementary school. And do we want yes or no on roughly 70K for a contingency for a potential kindergarten teacher.
Right?
When you've basically got latitude to get up to 85 students would more or less be your cap at the moment to get you 17 by 5.
And then an additional 65 or 68,000 for the bear.
No, only if we're gonna have the teacher.
Only if we're doing the
I
kindergarten.
mean, yes or no, I don't know.
No, I'm saying that if we need the kindergarten teacher, then to get to that number.
If we're gonna placehold $70,000 for a staff member, I think we wanna have a conversation about whether we accelerate the entirety of the barrel.
Yeah.
Which is 130 altogether, something in that ballpark,
It's
all their payments that are due.
right.
Okay.
I think so, yeah.
So you're thinking that maybe you'd want to do all their payments.
I just want to understand what the range is. If you were to accelerate, you could accelerate up to that amount. And based on this current year health projection, we're still looking at what left over at 250. If we're projecting 250K a year in health claims and continue that conservative approach, you had given us that slide last month.
250 a month.
Yeah, let's rerun the math.
That's it.
Easily on that,
It'd be-
now that we know we had
We had another
180.
So we were saying that from last month to the end of June, we're anticipating $1.5 million in claims at $250,000 per month. That could be lower.
Could be 1.2 million.
Well, we just had one month that was 70,000 low,
So
right? So maybe it's not 1.5, and you could safely now, because that month is in the past, safely now predict 1.430.
As long as we don't go to 350.
Well, yeah, as long as
That's
it's.
all, yeah, somebody needs to have appendicitis.
Can't tell the future.
Right, yes.
Next thing.
Right, I think I'm comfortable conservatively projecting that out. I'm just curious where so the potential year end is 1.446.
That was a month ago. I have to look at what is currently in our claim, our health benefits claim account. And if we've drawn any more money out of,
no.
yeah, okay,
And
so
so then that 1.446, we had to do something with the first step. Let's see, current balance. And what's your next slide with the little seesaw?
the next slide was,
Right, so then if you restore the health balance to 800, you're left with 646. 3-ish, a little under 3-ish% of the budget.
right,
Unaccounted for right now. And if from that 646, you said, I'm gonna take $130,000 and pay the bearer, you're at $500,000 left over basically, and you've taken all of that and accelerated it.
so then you're really looking at what is, this was a 12.5% increase. What increase is that? And then the seesaw effect, right?
So that is 646 on a 12.5% increase. So if you have that increase, you're increasing, you got another $175,000 in budget.
Right. And our increase. Getting back to, where are we? This was the increase. Well, this is when we did this last week. If this is still true, Sarah. It was at a $357,000 increase. An
Yeah, that is.
8.5 was at 243,
Yeah.
and then 8% was 228. And then,
So basically lowering that at pace with the bearer.
so if you want us to rerun these numbers,
Oh, wait, no, I'm conflating things. That, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. That seesaw slide confuses me because we're talking about next year's projection.
yeah,
which doesn't have anything to do with where the projected year end is, except how much you're willing to put at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not right.
So I have health insurance somewhere between 5 to 8%, class size in kindergarten. There are options.
I think that's it.
Do we want to, talk about the science curriculum? And what expenses from that could come out of next year's budget if they're purchased this year, especially if we can get teachers training on them in June?
Yeah, I'd actually shift that to math,
Sorry.
the math
So,
curriculum resource,
math.
because some of the science professional development has already started this year with Rebecca Richards' leadership. Whereas the math, once we make our selection and present it to the curriculum committee and then bring it back to the board, I'm very interested in getting my hands on some of those materials so that we can begin the professional development in late spring and the teachers could head off for the summer with some things in hand.
There's a definite educational benefit to accelerating that.
Most
So
of,
we budgeted math at 45,000
right, so
in the
I really don't
curriculum
think it's going to be
instruction.
more than that. It's probably a better chance it will be less than that based on where they are right now.
And we expect to have that decision in the next couple of months.
Yes. We've gone through 2 rounds with vendors and we've seen one program in action. We're looking to do another site visit.
So that's an option.
There was another conversation we had with respect to, I think it was a speech language pathologist, this question of, we're outsourcing this, but we want to go to 0.4s and 0.5s, and what, should we go to 1.0s versus the benefits costs? Have we landed anywhere and learned anything about these part-time positions and whether they make any sense?
We didn't study that further
No.
since our last meeting, but we did have a rationale for looking at constellation services and outside professional services in that line versus hiring internally. And it appeared that, our options saved funds from using outside professional services. So I don't recall exactly where that is. I can go back and take a look.
Are there other things that would be more effective? Because it sounds like the math spend is actually more effective if we accelerate it. Are there other things that would be more, like where we'll get more bang for our buck if we accelerated the purchase?
Versus
Let me give that some thought. Yeah, so I would like to go back to our strategic plan and look at the priority areas and what makes the most sense.
We'll get far better ROI if we can start accelerating professional learning in the spring than just, paying retired teachers 6 months early.
Yeah. I think I'd like to hear more about that,
About what? Sorry, Mark.
about why, and how you would, if you move that up, why that would benefit us.
Oh, why that would benefit?
Yeah.
I can share that right now. Right, so very similar to the way we did it for the elementary program adoption. It benefits the students ultimately if the teachers can have professional development in the spring before the new academic year and become acquainted with the materials so that when the year begins, they're familiar with the materials, they've had a chance to trial some of the activities, and they're very comfortable. So then we can begin the school year with the kids jumping right into the curriculum, as opposed to, so the other option would be, we order the materials after July 1, they arrive over the summer, the teachers don't work in the summer. I cannot compel all teachers to come in for professional development, but if I offered professional development over the summer, then we would be paying teachers at a minimum at the curriculum writing rate for their time. And it's, in my experience, it is hard to get 100% of our teachers participating in the summer months. If we're talking about a larger group of teachers. And then if we can't do that, then the teachers receive those materials on the first 2 days before the school year begins. When there are a host of other activities, it is not the best time to do complex professional development. It's a fine time to get people re-engaged in the academic professional life of schools, to have transition meetings, to do some training. The teachers will be anxious about a new program because it's a big change. It's a big change to them as educators, and it's a change for our students. So we
When-
want
when
them to
would
be
you do it?
comfortable.
Like,
When I would do
if
it
you
in
had the
May.
materials in,
I would do it.
you have days scheduled, right?
Yes, I would do
Already.
it on the May early dismissal day.
So Chris, you're reasonably compelled.
Your question about speech and language pathologist, we budgeted 0.6 for a speech and language pathologist, which was 41,000. The rehabilitation associate contract was 75,000, so the delta is approximately 34,000, but 0.6 requires health insurance.
Right.
However, we did, in addition, budget $30,000 in other professional services line in the in the speech and language pathologist area as a plan B. So we could further cut other professional services in speech and language by $30,000. So that would be a savings. We could probably take $30,000 out now, right now. But if.
But you have to have-
You know, so the delta is 40,000 versus 75,000 for the outside professional services contract. And we could further reduce that by 30,000, which would be an additional savings, but then we definitely need to get to 0.6 speech and language pathologists, which is 41,000.
I guess it gets back to why aren't we talking about a 1.0 SLP? We're already in the benefits range. And that further reduces the outside cost.
Because the marginal cost is much smaller.
Right. I'm already so close to getting a 1.0 because I'm paying all the benefits anyway. If we're gonna go to I'd rather be at 0.4 than 0.6 because 0.6 bears all the risks of a self-insured health plan.
You may be into a personal availability situation. I don't know what's.
We look at a personal availability at 0.6 already.
Okay. So I could add that in right now. We know we budget, let me see here. We budgeted, I think we budget 68,000 for a general position at 1.0. So I could change the 0.6 to a 1.0. 1.0, I can change 41 to 68,000. And then I can go back to other professional services and remove the 30,000 in outside speech services. And
You actually net saving $3,000.
so you actually, so you're getting a full-time speech and language services and you're saving a couple hours. Yeah, saving 2,000. So the budget went from 4.26 to 4.21.
There you go.
More
It's 100 more of
But
those.
it's not bad to do this in real time, right here.
And the BCBA is worked out, right, where we're hiring in-house and reducing the amount we were spending for, to make sure that made it in.
Yeah, we looked at the BCBA.
Sometimes we can't fill the position, and so then because we must provide services.
So you gotta carry the outside and hope to hire inside.
That is correct.
Well, sometimes we do both.
Sometimes we do both. We do both at the
We have
same
some
time.
internal hires, we have some
Yeah.
district hires and some consultants.
Jason, if you go back up.
Yes.
In the red there, we budgeted an extra 30,000 in case we don't hire a 0.6.
That's why I was able to remove that 30 and do what we just did.
But is there other money that was budgeted on the expectation we only hired a 0.6?
No, That is that's why I highlighted it.
That was a good question.
Yeah, so I just saw that just then. But in terms of your BCBA, the BCBA line, when Jen first presented the budget to us, was 185,000 in outside professional services for BCBA. And so that's when we went back in and added the BCBA for 68,000. However, Jen still feels that we needed to add the BCBA and still keep some consultant funds in that line because it's such an area of need. So this is not the same as the speech and language, which is what you pointed out, right?
And the 52.8 is the consultant, is the kitty for the consultant,
Yes,
if you need it.
yes, which was down from 185 in addition of the BCBA. Certified uncertified behavior technicians.
We can lose our quorum.
We temporarily did.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not the same situation as the speech and language pathology.
So the SLP issue is sort of off the board now, that's resolved.
That's resolved.
So I've got healthcare percentage, class size question, their funding, math curriculum funding, and I think you can include in there other like expenditures for which there is sort of a current year educational benefit that would inform this conversation ever so slightly. Other
For Chirag, I just want to make sure, I want Jason to be able to say that, you know, the strategic priorities that you plan for year one, because I think it's next year, year one, are in.
well, he's coming up. No, we have to. It's going on. Coming this way.
There it is.
I did the same thing last week. So in terms of the strategic priorities that are in there are actually, that's still in there, is the K-8 math coordinator, the English language learner teacher share, and the structured literacy teacher share. These are all priority one, and they're still in there. To your credit, we have not talked about those things. We're really talking about some of those other options. And obviously, when, you know, we didn't put them on there and we didn't put them on the, you know, consider list. Yeah, so there's still strategic priorities. that are on there.
You know, I do want to be responsive to questions. I know you've received a handful of community questions on the budget that revolved around advanced learning opportunities in both buildings. And I just wanted to make sure that you're comfortable with the current sort of menu of offerings and how they're competitive with peer districts, et cetera.
Stephanie and I were talking about that today in terms of the gifted and talented program and the teacher that we have over at over at Reading Elementary School. I talked to Melissa about it, and I think they've made some internal changes to who that teacher services at Reading Elementary School, and essentially providing more enrichment for grades K and 1 and more formal gifted and talented services for grades 2, 3, and 4. And I think that's best practice. Generally, you don't make a kindergarten or a first grade student gifted and talented. So they've made those internal changes, which I think means that you reach more students. In terms of John Reed Middle School, you know, we don't have a specific gifted and talented teacher, but you do have kind of the emphasis on, it's not Project Lead the Way, but what do you call it in?
Integrated STEM.
The integrated STEM program. I think that is a great program, and
So I think that in a sense anecdotally in John Reed, the administration's been more flexible about advancing students a full grade year than they had in the past, which is provide different pathways for acceleration.
We've created procedures in mathematics for students to be accelerated.
Yeah, and I think that in the middle school and high school level, there's more opportunity through courses and acceleration to do that than there is at the younger grades to accelerate someone a full grade level in elementary school.
So I will say that anecdotally, I've heard a lot of, or I won't say complaints, but concerns about the Gifted and Talent program at RES specifically. I have a kid that's in that, you know, it gets put out with Mr. Farina. It does seem under-resourced, based on, you know, what I've seen at other schools. And again, anecdotal, I don't necessarily know what best practices are. I was also told anecdotally that the program used to have multiple teachers and it's gotten pared down over the years. And sort of been forced into this role of trying to be efficient with one teacher serving for, you know, 3 or 4 grades, and it's leaving out, you know, essentially other areas. But, you know, gift and talent doesn't necessarily just mean math and reading. It could be the arts and music, and so we're because we're limited on the resources, we're optimizing against that, but it's not necessarily, you know, hitting all the or checking all the boxes that we'd like, or meeting the expectations of some of the parents.
I think Stephanie, you probably have to go back to 2015 to when there was an enrichment full-time
Right.
teacher and a gifted teacher.
2007, when I arrived, we had 2 full-time teachers of the, who were enrichment teachers, 2 full-time enrichment teachers and 1 teacher of the gifted. And so with that model, students in grades 3 and 4 received formal, full-out gifted programming. And then students in all grades received enrichment opportunities. As enrollment began to decline, slowly those positions were culled back until we got to the point where we had 1 full-time teacher of the gifted. And at that point, there was also a change in personnel. We had a longtime veteran teacher who retired, and then a new teacher went into that role. So at that time, we formed an ad hoc Board of Ed committee, and we studied the research. We looked at a lot of different models for gifted programming, and we implemented actually the former model, which was a combination of direct instruction and enrichment. But the teacher's time, the balance of his time was weighted very heavily in direct instruction. He did not have a lot of time in grades K through 2. And so this year, they tried to implement a model that would allow his time to be more evenly spread through the grades. And so for those students who are formally identified as gifted, sort of the state identification, those students no longer receive, for example, a daily math instruction if they're identified in the area of mathematics, which is what used to occur. They were kept on grade level. Those students were never accelerated, but their curriculum, I would say, was compacted, and there was a lot of problem-solving opportunities there. I think it does make sense to gather some more feedback from parents, from teachers, and hear about the experiences this year, because the model this year is different than it was.
I think in a post-pandemic world, I'm also starting to hear there was a lot of learning loss. And as a result, there's a lot of work to catch students up, which creates even a larger gap between those kids who maybe are already well past that academically. And it feels like it's a bigger chasm than maybe it was before. How much of that will work itself out over the course of the recovery is to be seen, but I think that might be progress.
Or if it feels as if the emphasis in the classroom is very much on the need to catch up in that whole class, then I can understand as a former teacher of the gifted, how that might feel to those students who need something that's different and more.
We did not have additional gifted and talented staff in our strategic priorities, but under bucket 4, which is meeting the needs of all learners, we did have a kind of a focus area, and that was to review our gifted and talented identification criteria and current program implementation. And actions include 1, review and analyze identification criteria across districts, vertical program options such as student progressing through districts and grade levels, and adding a standardized identification instrument. Right now, we're identifying through one particular tool. I wanted to use a different tool, which I think casts a larger net, which potentially could increase the number of students in the gifted and talented program, which I think is important. But I did not include that as a strategic priority. I basically have it in there as a priority as to study our program and to change our identification procedures and to cast that net. But if you feel like that's something that we can add, we didn't add that as a budget priority, though. We added that as a program evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the level of staffing, we are still, with one full-time teacher at the elementary level. That's more than most Durgay districts have. Many districts have gone from a full-time to a part-time teacher, and oftentimes half of that teacher's time is spent with remedial intervention. Easton does not have a gifted program or a teacher for gifted.
What is it that they drop? They drop the enrichment and just stay with the gifted, the mandated stuff?
Well, nothing is mandated, only identification is mandated. So programming is not mandated.
So you gotta
You have to
identify it, but you don't have to do anything about
The
it.
districts, we choose our own method of identification.
Sorry, I thought it would make sense.
State does not
how many years?
Optimist.
We could literally say, here's one assessment, and on the basis of this assessment, we're gonna take the top 2%, and that's what we're gonna call it.
Yeah.
And we don't do that.
When
We have a
looking
much
at,
more
when we were looking
comprehensive-
at the test results and the averages and sort of the foursquare, right? We're talking about how points had fallen. And, you know, we're focusing a lot on sort of lifting the curve from the left up. You don't, and then this may just be, doesn't make sense, but we wouldn't necessarily invest more in the gifted program to help pull the average up because those students can pull it up by.
Well, our goals are focused at the percentage of students meeting goal. And the percentage of students meeting goal in, let's say, third grade is 80% or 85%. And we compare that 85% to other districts that are like us in the area. And goal is defined by 4 bands, right? And the percentage of students meeting goal are basically at the 3rd and 4th band. And so our goals and our strategies around definitely in getting students from the 2nd band to the 3rd band, because they're on the cusp of meeting goal. But the students who are already in the 3rd and the 4th band are already meeting goal. That doesn't mean that we don't try to.
But they're not gonna pull anybody's
They're not
average
gonna
over.
pull any average.
That's right.
Yeah.
So is that why schools have started, or it sounds like under-resourced these
Or
programs?
just
Yeah.
difficult
it's what?
budget decisions, I would say.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, if it doesn't impact your score necessarily on that, then yeah, of course. you're gonna
You get no
start-
bonus for it.
Right,
And nobody's gonna say how great it is that, not only did Reading have 25% of kids at the 4, but 75% of those at the very top of the benchmark. It's not a big.
What you really want to look at is the student's ability and their achievement, and then the amount of progress that they're making. I would have more concerns about students who had very high aptitude, but weren't achieving to their potential or making progress. So you don't want those students to be in that box. If you think about 4 quadrants where strong ability, but not a whole lot of progress, they just sort of hover in the same place because they're not challenged adequately.
That might be a lot of ammo for you to use at Carluzzi's, verbal, ammo. You know, when, yeah, we've underfunded the gifted and talented. Well, actually,
it's come up only because, I mean, those parents might be the most, open or, open about it. So that's what I've heard most. And then, if it is something that we sort of cut because the population was dropping, now the population's up, are we, again, it sounds like we're doing the best we can with what we have.
Are we delivering the same services
Yeah.
now as we did 15 years ago,
Yeah.
or not, because we haven't recovered the staff? I think what's interesting to me about looking at this, and Dr. McKinney, you made a comment about, it wasn't one of our budget priorities, but it was something we wanted to look at.
Yeah.
A lot of these strike me as, we need to look at and figure out what we want to do. And then once we know what we want to do, it's gonna be a budget it could be a budget thing, because you might come out of it and say, I want to buy this new assessment tool, or I want to hire an additional half an enrichment teacher to
Yes.
cover these needs.
Right.
And so, as we're staggering these things out and saying, this is for 24, this is for 25, this is for 26, it seems that in each year, there's probably gonna be a half dozen spend ons and a half dozen work on.
Exactly.
Which then become the following year's spend on or don't spend on.
Yeah, like we talked about at the top of the meeting, studying and doing a program evaluation in special education. What could come out of that is we need additional support. Right now, based on just referrals and numbers, I don't know whether we need 2 special ed teachers. I think we can grant fund 1. But when it comes to gifted and talented students and using the particular tool that we're using, which was the OLSTAT, and looking at the SAI index, which is the student ability index, and the difference between non-verbal and verbal, I think there's another way to measure a student's aptitude and ability, which is a different tool. That's why I put it in there. I think that once we start using that tool and start weighting the percent of students meeting that particular benchmark plus other areas, I think will actually increase the number of students eligible for gifted and talented. That's a good thing in Durgay School District, where then you can justify increasing staff. But there are other goals in this work as well, which talk about that we want students to have 500 computer science coding lessons by the time they reach middle school, that we want to increase the percentage of students in algebra. There are other benchmarks in there that talk about kind of meeting the needs of high level kids, right? As well.
So, Thursday, healthcare percentage, class size, Vera, math, other expenditures that might be accelerated into the current year's budget and removed from next year as a result.
Yeah.
With a particular emphasis on that for which there's a bona fide sort of educational benefit. And I didn't put it in my notes, but I feel like, did we come back around on the special educator? We just took it out.
We just took it
Yeah,
out.
okay.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a kindergarten teacher.
Circle, yeah.
No, it's no more circling.
All right.
Hold on.
Speak now or hold your peace on other things that you'd like information on Thursday. All right. Okay. Thank you for a productive conversation on that. I think we've got. Sorry?
All good.
So close to striking the gavel.
So, no, Sarah has 20 minutes for us.
No.
All right, any board committee reports? See, no board committee reports. We'll look for a motion to adjourn. Mike, second, Shrug, we adjourn, absent objection at 9:49.
And we're on for 6. No?
No.
I never got it.
Oh, you were gonna talk to us about